Welcome to the PVM Podcast. I'm your host, Nick, owner and founder of Project Veteran Muscle Gym and Foundation. Here we discuss topics veteran and first responder related, which include active duty life, off-duty life, civilian life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. PVM's mission is to build physical and mental strength one veteran at a time. That being said, let's get this thing rolling. All right. Welcome to another episode of the PVM Podcast. Today we have Chris Cook and Derrick on, so you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 deal here. But a little background on Chris. Where'd you grow up?
First of all, thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually am somewhat local. I grew up primarily in Mugwanago.
Okay.
So born in Waukesha, raised in Mugwanago, pretty much K through 12, went through school there. Lived in the area, and we pretty much played sports. Mugwanago High School. Didn't really go very far from the nest, so to speak. Kind of had that traditional family, when I say so to speak.
Hometown boy.
Yeah, I was a hometown boy. I didn't really, other than after joining the military, I didn't really go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like, Mugwanago was my focus of life. It was my epicenter of life, where everything that was cool took place there, and that's what we did. Just hung out. Typical, probably not unlike what you did in your area.
I've never left Lake Geneva. At least you moved the city away.
That's true. Yeah, so that's kind of like the short story of what I've done.
Yeah.
I have a couple siblings,
Mm-hmm.
good parents.
So how many brothers and sisters?
So I have a sister that's 4 years younger than myself, and I have a younger brother who is spitting image of me. I think I'm the handsome one of the two, but he's 10 years younger than I am, and he's also a veteran.
Okay.
And is kind of doing his own veteran thing too. He's got a business and whatnot. We can maybe talk about that.
Yeah.
And then I have a sister. They both live in the Stevens Point area.
Okay.
And my father's passed away. My mom actually lives in Wisconsin Rapids part-time, and then she lives in Arizona.
Okay.
In the wintertime.
So were your parents from Mugwanago area too?
My parents actually, they traveled really far to go to Mugwanago. They actually grew up in Waukesha.
Oh, yeah.
So, my mom went to a Catholic school, and my dad went to the public school in Waukesha back in the day. So, he was probably a big deal when you took out that college, or rather the Catholic school girl.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But they got married, lived in Waukesha for a very short period of time, and then my parents built a house out in Mugwanago. My dad worked for Waukesha County Park System, so I think he retired after close to 40 years, and easily 35 of those years he was the manager of the county park in Mugwanago.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that he actually worked in Delafield Lake, Nagawaki. Did a lot of mechanic stuff. He was like a county mechanic for a while, and he actually ended up getting the manager of
Nagawaki.
Well, some people call it Nagawaki. Well, there's Lake Nagawaki, and then there's also Negawika. I think it depends upon where you live.
It's got to be a Waukesha thing.
Yeah, it's all Indian names. I think it's Negawika.
Or an Oconomowoc.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, I obviously still living in Waukesha County, but my mom actually was, she was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and then she was a church secretary.
Okay.
So she did that usually three days a week to kind of help with income for the family. And like I said, lived in Mugwanago. I was fortunate. My parents worked really hard, much like a lot of other parents, and they usually afforded us a vacation every summer.
Mm-hmm.
So got to go to Disney World and did all that stuff.
And
traveled quite a bit, a lot of camping. My dad was an avid hunter, so I grew up with that, as did my brother.
What age did you start hunting?
I think when can you do? Well, I started going hunting with him when I was real small, like probably before I could remember, without obviously having a firearm. But duck hunting was the big thing. Every Saturday, Sunday, we would go up kind of over by the Oshkosh area.
Yeah.
And we would go out and sit on the duck blind. And then when I got old enough to actually have a BB gun, then I actually thought I was the world's best marksman. And there was no cattail that was safe in the marsh. And so, that's kind of how I got into the firearms. And then obviously as I got a little older, then, we went to hunter safety, which my dad was really big into. And so, and then, we hunted together. It was my dad. It was his father it was my dad, and it was me, and so that was the three lineage there, or whatever, of out hunting. So my grandfather was easily in his 70s, and we were still hauling him out. My brother really never got into the waterfowl hunting aspect, but he did enjoy the deer hunting.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember just spending a lot of every Saturday and Sunday in the duck line, listening to the Packer game on Sundays with a little transistor radio when the animals weren't flying. And I spent a lot of awesome quality time with my dad there, which just kind of led towards the relationship that I had with my father was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to go down that path, my mom was an absolutely wonderful woman, still is, and she is. My mom and I are a lot alike, but I act probably more like my father,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a fantastic example of what I always thought like a good dad should be, or because he was.
Yeah.
I did actually suffer the wrath when I stepped out of line. I probably still have some scars on my backside, but they were well deserved when you try to start your house on fire when you're little and stuff like that. Ironically, I got into firefighting, but it was just one of those things where he was a fantastic example. I remember playing football, and I was not really an awesome football player, but my father, from my freshman to senior year, my dad would come to every single practice. Every practice. He would come, winter, summer. Well, it was obviously the fall, but it would be cold, pouring rain. Remember, you'd always have like one of those members-only jackets.
Yeah.
He had his baseball hat on, and he smoked a pipe when you could smoke on like a school campus. You could just see him smoking his pipe. You could kind of see that smoke barreling up. And he always offered me some insight, but it was always done in a positive way. It was never, my dad was a pretty good football player. So, you try to play to the image of who you know.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember that being, he always offered very positive words of encouragement, and obviously made the games. And he did the same exact thing for my brother. And my brother was actually a very good football player. He was a quarterback, played at the same school in Maguanago.
You said your brother's 10 years
10
younger?
years younger than I am, yeah. And we're probably, in terms of like close, we're the closest. I love my sister dearly. I don't see her as often. I see my brother on a very regular basis. Maybe having that veteran relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And we both kind of have some secondary veteran aspirations in terms of business and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, my dad was a fantastic example to both of us of what, we always thought that like a good man should be.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what set me, I think, forward on my path of try to maybe follow the straight and narrow, so to speak. We all fall off. But then having my sights, my father, just like his dad, was in the military. And I just knew that was going to be kind of a natural progression.
Yeah.
I didn't really even think about it.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Was your dad in the military?
Yes.
He was?
Yeah, my dad, my grandfather was in World War II in the Navy. My dad was actually in the Army. He was in the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a mechanic where I think he kind of probably really gained a lot of his mechanical aptitude.
Mm-hmm.
And he did that. I think he did it for 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then, just like I said, continue to work for the company.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Kind of always in some kind of a mechanical capacity.
Yeah, and then were your parents together the whole time?
Yep. Mom and dad. I guess what we always talk about, like the air quotes nuclear family,
Mm-hmm.
which that it was always that way.
Yeah.
To suggest it was always roses, that would be an absolute lie. But like much like it is for all couples and whatnot. But together all the time. Like I said, they budgeted their money. I always remember my parents. I know that my parents sacrificed for their wants in order to make good on some of the. Actually, I would say that they put out things on the back burner that they really wanted to really give us stuff that at the time when you think a pair of like sneakers is an end all be all, if you don't have that same sneaker like everybody else, and they would drive to 10 different stores to get you those, and then 6 months later you're on to the next thing. You don't recognize that there's some sacrifice there, right? I also got talking along the way saying, hey, you don't really need to be like everybody else. But when you're younger, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do. So, that's just. I've always had fond memories of my upbringing.
Yeah.
Had their traditional grandparents. My mom's father. My mother's mom had passed away from leukemia, but her father was still around, so I was able to get to know him, and he was an awesome dude. Played some minor league ball I think he did some farm team stuff for like the Braves.
Okay.
Never went professional, and then my grandfather and my grandmother on my dad's side were alive. And like I said, my grandfather he flew on a PBY in World War II. Came back like a lot of other veterans of World War II. He worked in a shop that made machines that washed bottles, like at a dairy. They washed the bottles.
What's a PVY?
That's a good question. It's a boat plane, and they rescued downed pilots.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it was a plane that could actually land on the water, and it had I don't remember how many crew members. He was a machinist mate on the aircraft, so they were responsible for like working on the aircraft, the airframe. But he actually spent his entire time, I think, in the South Pacific. And so so there's always, we get together, deer hunting camp, and Grandpa would have a few. He was a brandy guy. He had a couple of brandies, and then the stores would come out. But it was interesting about, I think sometimes the people that we would call our greatest generation didn't always have an opportunity to talk about that. Yeah. And then some of them didn't want to talk about it. And so, he, like a lot of his fellow buddies, they kind of dealt with that by consuming a considerable amount of alcohol, right? We could kind of understand that.
Yeah, I think that's the common number.
Yeah.
For most people. So,
yeah.
So let's rewind a little bit. You had mentioned you tried to start your house on fire.
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned that. No, I was just a kid. I was like a young guy. I had an affinity to want to mess around with fire. I don't know. My mom was going to have a party with some of her friends, and I just thought that I was going to take some toilet paper and stuff it in like a candle that she had burning because I wanted to see what it would do, and started some of the house on fire. That's when I really learned about discipline. When my dad got home,
yeah.
So that really didn't stop me. I mean, I guess I still enjoyed fire, but it was just
that was the worst part as a kid when your mom would say, "Wait till your father gets home."
Oh, 100%.
Crack in the butt wasn't as bad as the 6 hours waiting.
Oh, yeah, the anticipation, like you said, yeah, that was that. And
just give it to me now.
Yeah,
Nope, you're gonna wait.
No, you're gonna wait till your dad gets home. If I had a foul mouth, my mom would. A lot of people probably don't remember what like Lifebuoy soap was, but I can still remember what Lifebuoy tastes like because I mean it was, if I sassed my mom, I got soap, straight up soap. I really should have fresh breath. Still.
Forever.
Exactly.
No bacteria in the mouth ever.
Yeah.
Oh man. So I mean, how was school for you? What kind of student were you? How did that?
You know what? I was I was probably the middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
I do frankly remember when we would go to like parent-teacher conferences. I always had to be the first kid that had to be done with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that it was always done correctly, but I was always first place when it came to getting stuff done.
Speed.
Right,
Yeah.
Speed. It wasn't necessarily quality. So it was always like, well, Chris is a nice kid. He's very friendly, but he likes to be done fast. And then he likes to talk a lot. So I had a good social life in school. I was in the Key Club, which at the time was like part of the Kiwanis. So we did like community. Yeah, we did
Back
fundraising.
in the 1900s, you guys don't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Just after the wheel was invented.
Yeah.
So I did some of the community-oriented stuff back then.
Mm-hmm.
Let me step back. The Key Club was an organization that was a civic organization that was sponsored by the Kiwanis. And essentially, if you were on the football team, you were on the Key Club because the advisor was a coach.
Okay.
So you didn't really have a choice. But you had a choice if you wanted to be an officer, so I ran whatever. I think I was voluntold to be the president. But we did some interesting things back then. One of the biggest things we did that I really remember I'm proud of is that we went to all the elementary schools in the McGuanago area, and we fingerprinted kids for like their parents, like for child abduction stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So there was actually, we went around, and I think the police department helped us, and we fingerprinted all the children in the school if their parents allowed it to be. And then they actually received like fingerprint cards that they could have on file. So I guess back in that day, that was kind of a thing.
Well, maybe you fingerprinted me back then.
I don't know. I think I would have remembered you. You're kind of a big dude. I'd say that guy's husky.
I was like,
I'm sure not in school.
Yeah, right.
I was rail skinny back then.
Oh, man, you've obviously worked some magic.
Yeah, I got a lot of food.
So yeah, I mean, that was normal social. I hung out with my buddies. Wintertime, we had snowmobiles, and so we prayed for the snow days. And my mom would. That was back in the day when your parents would give you $5, and it was like, holy cow, this is the whole day I got. You go buy 5 gallons of gas, and you're literally gone, the entire day out snowmobiling with your buddies, and hoping the next day it was going to snow so you could do it all over again.
Yeah.
And I went hunting. That was the other thing. I hunted with some of my buddies. You could take a gun to school.
Yeah.
You take your shotgun and your hunting stuff to school, and right after school you went out hunting. I mean, it wasn't like you were taking it to school, but I mean, it was in your car. You might even talked about it. And, we're going to the marsh, blah, blah, blah. And I go there with a bunch of guys, and we go hunting. And those are really awesome bonds that I formed. The thing that's most cool about school for me is that every Christmas, easily 20 to 40 guys I went to school with get together every Friday before Christmas back in Maguanago. Still.
Wow.
And the numbers vary, obviously, based on their availability. There's people that come from out of state that will come back. We meet at Jay's Lanes in Maguanago, which is the bowling alley, because they have phenomenal pizza. But I mean, like, it's literally like a reunion every year.
Shameless plug for Jay's Lanes.
Yeah, right.
Jay's Lanes, Maguanago.
You ever go to the bowling alley in Heartland when it was around and have their fish fry?
No, I don't think so.
That was one of the best.
No.
Now it's gone. Now it's the Phoenix up there. It's still pretty good.
I don't really, it's interesting. I live in that area too, and I don't really remember exactly where it is.
Yeah, that's kind of the area I grew up in.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, did you get into fishing at all? Was that
more fishing now, which is another thing too, is one of the things that when I had mentioned my brother actually owns an outfitting shop and a fly fishing shop.
Okay.
In Stevens Point.
Oh,
and so I obviously have
What's the name of it?
Fall Line Outfitters.
Fall Line Outfitters.
Stevens Point, downtown Stevens Point. But
you're welcome.
But he's when he transitioned out of the military, he actually did 24 years. And so that was his mission, that he wanted to do this. And my dad did some fly fishing that I really never got into, but my brother got into more of the angling with my dad. And so my brother actually has this, and so subsequently he's kind of got me into it. I'd say that it's just something I'm elementarily trying to learn because I'm not all that good at it. Yeah. But it's a whole different ball game. It's a different skill. But you're also putting yourself outdoors in an environment that's peaceful, not only for your soul, but I also think it's peaceful for your head.
Yeah.
And try to help maybe quiet some stuff sometimes. You get a lot of noise, a lot of white noise in the world. So it's an opportunity to get out and do those things to maybe recenter yourself a little bit.
Yeah, fishing is really good at shutting the world off.
Yeah.
So.
Particularly, that's what they call fishing and not catching, because I'm not really good at that. Oh, he is. I'm not. But I also have a patience issue. Right?
I'm the worst fisherman
Yeah.
ever.
So it's I mean, that's kind of where I went down that path. So I would say it's probably more so now than it was back then.
Yeah. No, we go to Canada all the time for fishing. That's really all the fishing I get in, just because that is catching. You sit there for about 30 seconds and there's a walleye on there.
Get your hook wet and you got a fish.
Yeah, pretty much.
That is catching.
So,
100% catching.
But it's like you're on the water, traveling to your fishing spot for an hour at 45 miles an hour before you even get there. Like you're out in the middle of nowhere.
That would be cool.
So I went up to northern Michigan, Russian boar hunting a few years ago. We went out on Lake Superior. I was an idiot. I didn't realize how big Lake Superior is. And we went an hour and a half out, and we weren't even halfway across the lake.
I want to hear about this Russian boar hunting.
Yeah, what's a Russian boar?
Giant teeth that.
They have those up there?
So you went to Russia and then you went to...
No, Michigan. They raise them up there. It was a private hunting excursion. It was pretty cool. So, but yeah.
Did you get one?
Yeah.
Did you spear it?
No, shot it with a rifle. Okay. So, but my point is, like, Lake Superior is a huge lake. It's actually referred to as an inland ocean.
It's amazingly beautiful.
Yeah, they have like their own weather systems on the lake.
Yeah.
That's absolutely insane. So where did you go to high school then?
That was Maguanago. Yeah, Maguanago High School. Yeah, like I said, I didn't until I decided to join the military. I was an exchange student for a little while. I went to Germany. That was a really short, foreign exchange thing. I took German in high school, so that was part of to get credit.
Yeah,
I went to Germany for a while. That was it was like a vacation.
Oh yeah,
because you were, that's when they don't really recognize a drinking age there.
Oh,
and so I was. This is really not for parents' consumption, but I actually learned how to consume alcohol when I was in Germany, well underage, and that's when I learned like what a hangover was. But being 16, I was like up and ready to go, and let's do it again. But yeah, that was I probably did not, being young, dumb, and into that stuff. I probably didn't really look at that trip for the beauty that it really was, and from how old everything is. Like when you were in Germany and you looked at like an old castle, and that would be thousands of years old, hundreds or thousands of years old, and then you come to the United States and you look at it like we're so young, compared to all that. And I probably didn't absorb it for the way that I should have, but it was still a pretty cool trip to go to high school.
I mean, you're too young to appreciate it, but at least you saw it, and now you can appreciate it.
I can appreciate it. I have some fond memories. I probably have some photographs somewhere. I mean, I know I had the old German hat with the feather sticking out of it. Nice. Yeah. Should have worn it today. It's for another time.
That was only in the beer hall.
That's right, yeah.
So when did you go to college, or did you decide to go to the military?
So
first?
what I did was, I appreciate that question. So, I mean, I wanted to go to school, and like I said, my parents were of modest means, as I had indicated, and they worked really hard, as I had already alluded to. They really tried to provide us, and my parents never said that they wouldn't help me in school, but I just kind of felt, I had two reasons why I joined the military. I would say that the primary reason back at that time when I was like 17 years old is that I wanted it to help give me some money for school. But I'll tell you what I did was I had an opportunity to do what they do, split option or split training, where my junior summer I went to basic training.
Okay.
So I was 17 years old. My mom and dad had to sign the contract. And then when I got there, I actually went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Over the period of time and being, in being basic training, I can say that that's where I found at least what I believe is my patriotism was. There's an indoctrination aspect of the military, and it was the Army. Obviously, there's a huge push to make everybody work as a single, well-oiled machine. But I know that I had, and I remember I had written letters back home that I had this really sense of pride in my heart, where I knew that it was the right thing. Beyond the fact that it may support me to go to college, I knew that it was the right thing. So that was really the reason that kind of drove me. I mean, I like to say that I was, if you caught me, I would bleed red, white, and blue. I mean, obviously, I'm very proud to be an American and was back then. But when you're young and you're looking at financial options, I felt like it was the right thing for me to do. I didn't want to burden my parents.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I was obviously able to maintain or to garner some educational benefits out of that. So when I came back, I graduated from high school, and then I think it was 6 or 7 days later, I actually had to go back in, and I actually went, my first enlistment, I actually went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and I was actually in communications.
Okay, what year was this?
I graduated in 1987.
Okay.
So I'm 1 year older than Daniel. The 1980s. They were good years. They were good years.
Wow.
The music still reigns.
I was born in '86.
Okay, well,
I
cut, please.
My career spanned 2 centuries.
Yeah.
You're the same boat.
yeah. So, it was in 1987. And then I went back in and I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I was in communications security. Essentially, I learned how to use, and it wasn't really a repair class, but you did learn some basic mechanics, but how to use the devices that encrypted when we sent messages, either voice or even back then they used almost like a teletype machine that would send and then the devices that we would use would actually encrypt the message when you sent it from point A to point B. And so that was called ComSec, or communication security. And I did that, and then that actually enabled me to go to college.
Yeah. Okay.
So I did put myself through college. My first year of college, I went to UW in Milwaukee.
Okay.
I say that was my first year of college because I lived with some guys I went to high school with, who sadly maybe I've lost touch with some of them now, but we had the best time at college. But if you ask me what I learned that it was an expensive party. I had an awesome time. I lived down on campus for a year, and then after that, it was like, Mr. Cook, you're on academic probation. So yeah,
love it.
Yeah, I had to kind of think really long and hard about what I really wanted to do. So,
what were you studying for?
It's a good question. Mixology, maybe. I think. Well, I wanted to be I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Okay.
I mean, I scuba dive.
George Costanza.
Well, at least you know you're going to be in somewhat tropical climates if you're a marine biologist. So.
I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I don't know. I mean, I always had this affinity to water. One of the things I failed to mention earlier is like when I talked about my dad. One of the things that my dad and I did do a lot is we scuba dive together.
Okay.
Well, around here, we went to Florida. We would make some family trips, and my dad and I, because my brother was so young, we did a lot of diving together. So I've always kind of had that water draw. And so, yeah, the likely thing is I'm going to study sharks. So, yeah, I went to school, didn't really do all that well based on choices that you make. I had a great time. Obviously, things that, you still remember nowadays and that you would never trade for. But I took a summer off, or actually I took a semester off of school. Mm-hmm. And it was like, what am I going to do? So I ended up getting a job working in East Troy at a place that actually made like industrial heat treating ovens. Okay. And
it's a Waukesha oven.
Yeah. So I worked there. One of the guys.
Waukesha ovens, East Troy.
East Troy, Wisconsin. Yeah. So I worked there, and I was there for maybe a week or two, and then they made me a welder. Okay. With no real welding experience. Oh, but actually, I take it back. First job I worked on like one of the brakes. Okay. Bending the metal, right? I probably should have paid more attention on how to read a tape measure when I was in school. Because, it was like, even this day, I'm like, I don't remember what all those little tick marks are.
And then you sit there, start counting each one of them.
Well, that or you're like, okay, let's just go to the bigger one.
Yeah. Next one up. That's easy.
Right. I know that's a quarter. Anyways.
We're going to round up.
Yeah, we're going to round up. So I basically did that for a summer. And, I met people there that I probably wouldn't have normally, they wouldn't have been in my social circles, mm-hmm. That's okay, right? I mean, it kind of expands, your depth and breadth of people, but it also helped me realize I didn't have the aptitude to do it. I say I hated it. I didn't really hate it. It just
wasn't your thing.
Correct. Yeah. It wasn't my thing. So, after the working on the brake, I did graduate to doing they had the spot welder. Mm-hmm. I graduated to welding, and then before you know it, I was actually one of the guys that painted the ovens. And I'm like,
Do you know how to weld?
No, not at all.
No. I think that was the point he was trying to get.
No.
I'm thinking, wait a second.
No, not at all. Okay. No, I don't know how to weld at all, actually. They gave me some angle iron, and, it was a wire feeder, and the guy, I did, he showed me how to do it. He's like, just, replicate these little ripples, and anyways, and I know there's so much more to it than that. And if I, when I did, he's like, hey, you're really good at this. And I'm like, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. And then I
just told me to do what you did.
Right, exactly. And then I got really good at grinding my crappy welds. So.
Know what you're getting for Christmas.
Yeah. So, it was just, again, it was a point in life where you, right? I just.
Waukesha ovens closed in 1989. Quality control issues.
Yeah. I think actually when I was there, not to spend a lot of time on Waukesha ovens, they had a contract. They were making ovens that were used to heat treat Ford pistons. So I know that they actually had a pretty far reach on some of the stuff that they made.
I wonder if Ford still sucks. They've never replaced the ovens.
I'm driving today.
Yeah, didn't you just pull up in a Ford?
I did, because I got one of those is my piston. Anyways, the kind of transition from that is like, what am I going to do? And so I went out to WCTC, and I took like one of their entrance exams or whatever, and they're like, hey, there's a really need for nurses, and I'm like, really? And I'm like, so at first I chuckled about it, and I was like, it dates me, and I'll be careful what I say, but it was like I just didn't equate male nursing is something that I would probably want to get into back in that time, right? But and then I thought to myself, well, where are the ladies?
It's true, you're not going to have a shortage in class.
Right. So it was like, yeah. So my motivation was that I'll give it a shot, I'll try it. So I actually ended up enrolling into the nursing program at WCTC. I did actually pretty well. Kind of screwed around still. I didn't take life very seriously. I actually was still in the reserves at the time. Okay. So that was, again, to further date myself, that was in and around the time when the Gulf War, when Desert Storm kind of kicked off. So then I was kind of nervous that maybe I was going to get activated. It never happened. But I just remember there was a turning point when I was in school there. I was working at a hospital in a clinical. And one of the clinical instructors came up to me and she took me to the side and she's like, I want to let you know that there was one more exam left in the semester. And she's like, you are on the cusp. If you don't pass this exam, you're going to fail out of the program. And she's like, you really need to think long and hard about what you want to do. She's like, because I see how you take care of people and how you interact with people. Mm-hmm. She said, you need to put your nose to the grindstone on the academics part. She's like, I know you can do it, but you need to decide. So I ended up getting an A on the test. And I think that kind of solidified my path, and then I really embraced nursing. I actually graduated. I think I graduated like a 3.6 or a 3.7, which was nothing like I did when I was in high school.
It's amazing how much better you do in college.
Oh, well,
it's something you're focused on.
I never really thought about. I always thought about a job and a career and like what would I do, and I was still kind of a little aimless. But then I'll never forget the lady. Like I said, I really appreciate what she did, and I had seen her since then. And I actually had gone back to the school years after that and said that I really appreciated what she did, and that we all have like pivotal moments in our life, and that was one of those pivotal moments where I think she helped me change my decision making and then do what I perceived to be the right path for me.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I went off and I was working.
Yeah. Well, so you went into the nursing field right out of there?
Yeah, right away. I actually worked in Waukesha. I really wanted to work in the emergency room, and one of the things that I failed to mention that between then and the time I went to school, that summer when I was working at Wisconsin Oven, I had joined the fire department in Wanago. So I was living at home with my parents. I joined the fire department, and I really, really enjoyed. I liked the camaraderie of it. Mm-hmm. I also, they put you through some of the fire training. So in the summertime, I went to the fire classes and whatnot. So it was quite a while ago. And then I would go on calls, and I just had found that I had an affinity to, I think, critically think. I had no experience. Mm-hmm. So I had to rely on other people's experience. Dan and I were talking about this at lunch. When you have a tenured person that's on the job for 20, 25, 30 years, and they have just a modicum of experience, those are the people that, in my opinion, that you want to gravitate to and then be a sponge. Yeah. And if they're in the mindset, as we talked about at lunch, about being a mentor and they want to pass it on, so I had a few of those people on the department. Yeah. And so I really excelled at doing that. I enjoyed it. And then when I got out of school, when I got into nursing, I always wanted to work in the emergency room.
Did you aspire to be like EMT or anything?
I did that also. So I did fire and EMT before I finished my nursing degree. Okay. So I kind of did some stuff kind of at the same time because the classes were part-time and they were easier to kind of deal with. And then I went to school full-time too.
Yeah, is being an EMT, did you like that more than the hospital, or did you like the hospital more than EMT work?
I liked them both, but then when we get to the point of where I am now in my career, mm-hmm. You'll kind of see how it comes full circle. But I liked it both. I mean, I liked being outside the hospital because you had to rely on, like I had said earlier, about your critical thinking skills, mm-hmm. and I gravitated towards medicine. Maybe I always sold myself short about furthering my medical career. But truth be told, I'm very proud to have been a nurse, and most importantly, I'm proud that it allowed me to be an advocate for patients, particularly when patients couldn't be an advocate for themselves. Mm-hmm. The doctors and the nurses always have the best interest in the patients, in my opinion, but then a lot of times the nurse is kind of left behind to kind of answer those questions and then continue to be an advocate. And I enjoyed that aspect of the job probably the most. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I kind of enjoyed both.
Yeah. Just in there.
Well, I think too the difference too being in an emergency room versus out in the field is an emergency room is a sterile environment in the sense that when they come in, they're on a cot, they've already been stabilized, like there's already a plan. Whereas when you're in the field, you come across some of the craziest things and you have to think really quickly. And not everybody has the capability to do those things. And so the idea that Chris excelled at that, I mean, as we move forward through, you'll see either you have it or you don't. Like some people really can think under stress, and other people, it's not necessarily a trained skill. Yeah. So,
and it's the other thing that you talk about, like I alluded to. I really have a hard time reading a tape measure, but I can read a cardiac rhythm.
Yeah.
And it's a graph, and there's measurements on it, right? I mean, like looking at a 12 lead, when we look at someone's 12 lead tracing, if they're having a heart attack or not, I can look at that and I can understand what that means. It's just a different way of looking. It's a different environment, I still can't read a tape measure for crap today. I buy the easy read, right?
Yeah.
It's a good thing I'm handsome because I'm not handy. I'm not handsome either, but
You have one of those tape measures that you pull it out and it tells you the distance.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or I use my iPhone now. Or whatever. But I mean, yeah. So I got involved in that when I started working, and then I transitioned to. I moved around a little bit. I moved out to Las Vegas, and I mean I went out there to be a nurse out there. So I went out to Las Vegas.
In the city?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool, but I mean, think about that back in the day. That was like in the early 90s. So again, as we date ourselves in this podcast, it's like, in the early 90s, where were we in the early 90s?
I was
5th grade.
I don't even know.
First grade, 5 years old.
Yeah.
4 years old.
So, yeah, right. So I was out there working. I worked, really fortunately, I got a job. I had a friend that lived out there, and so he was like, hey, my wife and I said that you want to come out here, you can, you can stay with us until you get on your feet. I got a job at the same hospital in the same ER. So I already knew somebody. I had a friend that kind of been out there for a while and kind of showed me around. I think the cool thing about working out in Vegas is that I spent probably half of my time working in a pediatric emergency room, which again, for some medical providers, kids scare people, but they a lot of non-initiated medical providers are afraid of taking care of children. Mm-hmm. And so that, obviously, I was the same way. But I think having that daily contact with the kids really helped me kind of hone my skills. I think when I was in Vegas working there, it was a busy emergency room. I think it was at the top of my game. Like, I just felt very confident in what I was doing. But I always tried to maintain some level of, I want to always be a student, which I still try to maintain that today. I always talk when I teach and when I do lectures now, I always talk about being a student of the game and understanding that when you stop having that mindset, in my opinion, then you stop growing. Mm-hmm. So I'm 55 today, and I still think I learned something yesterday, and I know I'm going to learn something from you two guys today. So I chalked it up as a positive thing.
Hopefully it's something
for
you
sure.
want to learn.
I learned that liquid death is really not what it sounds like.
Sometimes it's what not to do.
Either that, right? It's still education.
Yeah, I'm smarter.
It's still
Learning,
education.
Yeah.
So
What can go wrong?
I worked out there. I did that for a few years.
Do you have any memorable moments or anything in Vegas doing that? Like, do you have any events and stuff that stuck out?
So,
that you can discuss.
Yeah. I can actually. Again, folks, some folks remember, and if you don't remember, I ask you to look it up. But there was a movie called Casino. Mm-hmm. So like Sharon Stone was in that movie. I'm trying to think who else. Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci. So one of the actors ended up having an appendicitis. And so they came into the emergency department, and I ended up being the primary nurse taking care of that person. So, it was pretty cool. She was...
She?
And that's all I'll say. But anyways, you can figure it out. But it was interesting. I mean, I was the primary person, doing the intake and all the vital signs and drawing blood and all that stuff. But it was really weird because everybody and their brother had to make an entrance into that room for some reason, or even if it was to pick up a piece of paper on the floor, because everybody, people want to get famous. They want to get a glimpse of that. Yeah, they were starstruck.
I was there.
Which my whole thought on being starstruck is completely different now too. But at the time it was really interesting. And then the other guy too that came in, and now I can't remember. It wasn't Gene Hackman. It was I can't remember the other actor came in. He was also shooting a movie. He came in. It was a different actor that came in, and it'll come to me. But he ended up having some kind of I think he had some kind of a cardiac issue that ended up not being anything. But that was they came to that hospital. Primarily that hospital at the time had a medical suite. So it was like the marble floors. It was like you stayed at Caesar's Palace, but it was a hospital room. Excuse me. So people would come there. They would get like VIP medical care. So it was actually pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
The downside of that was being the pediatric facility at the time in Vegas. We also saw, I hate to say, the worst of like children's injuries. They also had like the sexual abuse program there, so you sadly saw a lot of that. So you don't think about how that cumulatively weighs on your mind, but I mean, it's like we saw that on a very regular basis. And there were specialty nurses that took care of those kids. That wasn't one of them. But the other thing about Las Vegas and a lot of warm climates is everybody has a swimming pool, and not everybody watches their kids. And so the drownings that we would have, remember one day we had 4 pediatric drownings in one day that none of them survived. So you talk about, there's on one side of the coin, we're talking about, hey, I got to meet an actor and actress. And the other side of the coin is that you're at your lowest point when you are having to take care of these kids. And you're really throwing everything at them that you have. And there was a huge team approach to that, which I really appreciated, and they were not successful.
Yeah, that's like even in Dan's situation and stuff, there's now with social media and everything, you see all these body cam videos and stuff. There was one that just recently saw. There was a mother, a father, I assume, 2 kids. The one kid is sitting, the older girl is sitting in the chair watching TV. The police barge in. Parents are completely doped up. The other kid has to be infant underneath the mom, just co-sleeping death or whatever from drugs. And you can tell the officer can barely keep it together. Like, I mean, he's holding back from not ripping this woman's head off.
Yep.
So, and it's just the amount of stuff that you guys see, hospital, police, stuff like that. I don't think people really put 2 and 2 together. They're always like war fighters. They see the worst of it, but first responders and stuff, they see some bad stuff.
I would even build on what you're saying. It's like in Dan's experience, 31 years you were? I'm sorry, 33 years. I mean, I think Dan's a war fighter, right? I mean, a battlefront's just a different geography.
Yeah. Well, it's. I agree with you, law enforcement in general, because most soldiers will go to combat for 6 months, a year, 18 months. Some of them go, multiple deployments. Right? But they see in a 2-year period what we see in 30, 20, 25 years. But it is cumulative. If you don't understand how it affects you that moment, it's down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, and then like when you're deployed overseas, I mean, you're losing people that you know and everything. You don't really get any time to grieve. Usually you get a ceremony for burial and stuff, but then you're back out the next day. So it's once you're done there, you come back. Now it's like, wham, you get nailed with that. So
and sometimes you don't even have time to process it, and that's and back in the 90s, so I would say up until I think the military is a little bit different.
I think you're right.
In whether you're talking about medical field or firefighting or law enforcement, firefighting is way ahead of the curve. But there was never resources. It was just go out, do your job, get back to work. Like, so what? That's what we get paid to do. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's why you have suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, broken families, things like that. And I think it's all across the board. They're catching up, but they're still way behind the curve. Unfortunately.
Well, so after Vegas, where did you?
Yeah, I mean, I floated. I moved to Illinois for a while. I did some more nursing-related stuff in Illinois, something outside the realm of emergency medicine. And then it was a segue back to the States. Back to Wisconsin, my home. Excuse me. Yeah, the States. Okay. Well, living in Champaign-Urbana is kind of like being out of the country. So, yeah, I actually worked for Kraft Foods as a nurse. So it was a different, way outside my wheelhouse. It's like, hey, and I did it for money. It was like, hey, the money was really good, but it was interesting. It wasn't high-speed trauma nursing. It was sitting in a plant and taking care of the employees, which was equally as important. And I had, made a lot of really good friends down there, and also garnering respect from the employees because showing that I legitimately cared about these people. But the biggest thing I found ironic or weird with Kraft was that at the time, Kraft was owned by Philip Morris, who makes Marlboro cigarettes, among others. And one of the things that I had to do as a nurse for Kraft is I had to actually have a smoking cessation program, but you could get free cigarettes in the lunchroom. So it was like
It's a little back.
It was really interesting. Like, because of Philip Morris, you got free cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
At the time, they also, I they owned a Miller brewery, so you could get beer. I mean, it wasn't like they had free beer while you're working, but they had like Christmas gift boxes, and they owned like I think it was Brock's Candy. I don't quote me on that. And they had owned they owned a confectionery. Maybe it was Mars, but it doesn't matter. At Christmas time, you would get basically a gift box of all the products that they owned, and you would get a carton of cigarettes, you know. So it was like, here, you go forth and teach smoking cessation, and everybody's getting free cigarettes.
Yeah,
so it was interesting, you know. And but you know, anyway, it was just different. But it was a segue of me to like a stopover so I could get back to Wisconsin. I missed my family, and then I started, you know, I worked back in Wisconsin, and then I ended up getting hired. I did a few other little odd jobs that were regarding like EMS. Then I got hired to work at Lakeland Hospital here in Walworth County as their EMS educator, their coordinator. So I was able to actually get involved in education, and then I still had the ability or the capacity to work in the emergency room here. And I think I did that for, almost like 10 years. And so I had a really great time working down here in Walworth County. Yeah. So I got to learn everybody. I got to meet all the cops. You know, like that was.
Is that how you guys?
I think it was actually when we first.
I saw you in the emergency room, but we got
our eyes
on
met.
spot.
Yeah, our eyes met, and that was.
We knew it was. Yeah.
So yeah, I worked at Lakeland Hospital for quite a while, and so having an opportunity, and you know, all the sheriff's offices department. I can't even speak now. The sheriff's department, easy for me to say. You know, the police officers, because of bringing some of the jail clearances and whatnot up to the emergency department. Mm-hmm. So I got, you know, I had an opportunity to meet those guys, and I did that for I think I did it was for close to 10 years.
Yeah, Lakeland has to be an interesting emergency room to work in.
It was, and you know, one thing I'll say about it is it was a small community hospital. I think just before I got hired, it had transitioned away from being a county hospital. It was Walworth County. Yeah. I will tell you that in my time there, that is where I learned the most. Because of the fact that the staffing levels were much lower than they were in Las Vegas, the community was really relied on that hospital as a resource for all sorts of stuff. And so I saw some of the sickest patients and maybe even some of the most injured patients at that hospital.
But that was before Mercy wasn't even.
That's correct. Yeah, Mercy
Hospital wasn't there.
That was like what, 2015 or something. Mercy went up. It wasn't even
early 2000s.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
But it started only as urgent care and has kind of grown into a hospital. But yeah, Lakeland was the only hospital besides Burlington and Fort.
Yep, and Waukesha, which is still pretty far away. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so that was the bread and butter. You know, with Highway 50 running through there, or 67, 50, 33. I mean, some of the nastiest accidents. You know, still a very strong agricultural county. So you know, farm related injuries, ATV injuries. You know, the farmer that's been working in the fields for 50 years never went to a doctor, and then has the gripper. You know, like they bring him in, and you know, there's cow manure on their boots, right? And it was a 12-bed emergency room, and I worked with fantastic nurses, techs, ER techs, all of them were involved in the fire rescue in the county. So that those were their friends and their family members, and then the physicians were also the early physicians that were there were like old school from ever. You know, they. Did
you work with Dr. Hearn?
I did. Yeah.
That guy was. Love that
guy. He was like the coolest guy. One of the coolest doctors I've ever met.
No bedside manner, but spoke truth to power, and that was it.
Richard Hearn.
Yeah. And here's the thing: if you're there, that's the doctor I want working on.
He walk in, he goes, "What's going on with you today, my boy?" You know, he's like, "Okay, well, we're gonna get you figured out." And he's like, he'd walk back, he's like, "Let's get him out of here." Like, you know, he was really big about like treating people and just getting them out the door. But I mean, the guy had a heart of gold, but he was no BS.
Yeah, I brought a guy in one time for jail clearance, and he was a no person. And Dr. Hearn walks in and says, "Hey, Dan, how are you?" I said, "I'm good, Doc." He goes, "How are you tonight?" And the guy goes, "Go after yourself." He goes, "He's cleared." That's it. Like literally the quick, like 30 seconds in and out.
It was from the door assessment. And I mean, like, you're just like, you know, one of those people again in your life that you think about that made an indelible impression. And like, he was one of those guys. You know, he always spoke very gently, always spoke very positive about the people that he worked with. I mean, he cared about his patients. He was just very matter of fact. So that was like that was a growth point for me because I learned so much. I hate to say I was forced to learn, but like we really relied on each other because we had limited staffing.
Yeah.
We used Flight for Life all the time. I got a job working part-time down in Rockford on one of their helicopters as a flight nurse during that time, and I was really actually good at my job. Like I'd say I felt like I was firing on all cylinders. I felt like I was always making very good critical decisions.
How old were you at this time?
Oh, God, in my 20s. Yeah.
Young and passionate still.
Yeah. And I'm still passionate, but your point's well taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all the neurons aren't firing up now so much anymore. Back then they were all snapping at the same time.
Well, now they're on cruise.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it was just like a period of growth where I was just like, I was drinking it from a fire hose, and I was always really excited about doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some people that drink from the fire hose, and there are people that shut it off and like, well, this is too much.
Yeah.
But if you're consuming it and you're actually,
I think at that time I probably was.
Well, I think too, you're blessed when you find something you're passionate about. There's not a lot of people in this world that we all know people that go through life dreading every day at work. And I know I'm going to say something, and Chris will agree with me, is I never dreaded going to work. I looked forward to it. I love my job. I love learning, and Chris is the same way.
Yeah.
So the idea that you have something that you truly love and you enjoy doing, that makes a world of difference.
This was like in the middle 90s. I can tell you time frame wise what my age was exactly. I don't remember 100%, but it was like middle to later 90s is when I was doing that.
Okay.
And then I did that for a while, and then I ended up getting. I had a friend that actually he ended up becoming the director of the emergency room in Waukesha Memorial, and they didn't have like an EMS educator position, and he called me up and offered some more money, and so I went to Waukesha Memorial, which is where I started.
Yeah.
When I first started nursing, I went right back, not right back, but
So, full circle.
full circle to go back there,
Mm-hmm.
and I was doing essentially the same job there, but with a little bit less requirements to work in the emergency room. It was more about working out in the community with the fire departments.
Yeah, that's nice to get out and about. And then are you still in the reserves this whole time?
Oh, good question. I finished off that, and then I had a period of separation, and then I appreciate you bringing that up. On a whim, I ended up joining the Air Force Reserves. So, and when I say a whim, I was bored. One of the things they say about the service, and I kind of was talking to Dan about this. He kind of asked him if he felt the same way. But when you leave the brotherhood / sisterhood of that environment, there was a part of me that I felt was missing. And so I kind of sought out like what can I do that's maybe what I thought was a little bit less high speed, that would still allow me to kind of get back. I enjoyed having a military bearing, and so I actually self-reported out I went to the 440th out in Milwaukee. And I went to one of the recruiters and said, "Hey, can I get in?" They salivate at people like you because they're like, well, "Yeah, we can make this happen." So I ended up,
serious?
Yeah, I ended up getting back in. I did a 3-year stint at the 440th. They were actually able to get my rank. I was able to keep my rank, and then I said I want to do something that is not related to medical. So I actually was a security forces sergeant, which, for lack of a better description, it's like the police force for the Air Force. At the 440th in Milwaukee, I mean, they had to man a gate, so they had armed service people at the gate because of the aircraft, and so that was a fenced-in area. It was a controlled area. The aircraft were an asset, and so literally, I actually was armed more in the Air Force than I was in my first military Army stint. So like when we would go there, we would literally draw our weapons, we would lock and load our M16s, and we had pistols, and we would do different guarding responsibilities. The other thing is they had flight line security, so they would pull out the aircraft, and then there's a red line that goes all the way around that where the aircraft are. And in theory, if someone breaks red line, in theory, you can use deadly force to stop them. I mean, there's commands and whatnot. I don't want to oversimplify it, but you, in theory, could use deadly force to stop somebody that breaks red line, because they have a control entry point where you are only allowed to go in and out. And so I did that for 3 years, and truthfully, I probably did more infantry-type training in that unit, actually it was called a wing, than I did when I was in the Army the first go-around. It was actually really interesting. And they because of what I did in my civilian, I was the doc. So I was like the medical guy for the cops, but I worked with like Milwaukee cops. I mean, a lot of police officers that work in this entire area were also in the 440th. So it also helped me kind of like create relationships with law enforcement people, which it was just a fantastic. It was a cool circumstance. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and then is that where like Air Force One and stuff would land? Is where you guys?
No, actually, I think Air Force One, I think lands at the 128th, which is on the other side of the airfield. That's an Air National Guard asset. That they have the refueling unit there, and then the 440 was an Air Force. At least in my time that I was there, I don't ever remember any of the presidential aircraft landing there.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they didn't. I just don't remember it. Because now if the president or other people come into town, they land over at the 128th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Curious about which one.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 128th, but that could have. I just don't remember back in the day if they ever came to the 440. The 440th then disbanded, and then some units I think went to Minneapolis, and then other people went down south somewhere. I don't know if it was in the Carolinas or whatever. And if you stayed in, you could be flown to those on your weekends. They did that for quite a while, and then I'm assuming that just based on attrition that went away. I don't know when or how they stopped it. But if you stayed in, you could have been flown to Minneapolis, or again, I think it was in the Carolinas, but where you could go do your weekend drill.
Yeah.
In the Air Force.
So you're at Waukesha Memorial at the same time that you're doing this.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then I had another, like I said, I did 3 years there, and then when that enlistment came, I'm like, I'm gonna get out. Mm-hmm. So I got out, and at the same time, my younger brother that I talked about earlier, my brother originally did 4 years in the Navy. So he got out of high school, joined the Navy. He was on an aircraft carrier. If you ever watched any of those documentaries, like the guys that actually carry the weapons on their shoulders or whatever, they're called aviation armament, and they're red shirts. He was one of those guys.
Okay.
So that's what he did. He did that for 4 years. And where I'm going with this is when he got out.
I thought you were talking about like Predator.
No, yeah, I wish it was. No, if you see like they would carry the missiles, and they would put the missiles on the aircraft. That was aviation ordnance, it was called. So he did that, and he was really into that. So he did 4 years of that. But where I'm going with that is he got out, and he was doing a few jobs. And in Waukesha, there was a guard unit that was a medical unit. And we were talking, and he's like, hey, want to go back in? And I'm like, and I think maybe he was missing something too. I guess I really never had this conversation with him, but I'm like, yeah, I'm still young enough, So it was a medical unit. We both went through the whole processing, and he ended up getting in, and then I think I got in shortly thereafter. In the military, nurses are a commissioned position, so it would be a lieutenant. Usually, you go as a lieutenant. That unit had they only had one nursing position at the time that was full. So it was like either I don't join or I took a non-commissioned officer position, which at the time I wanted to do with my brother. So I did that. So we joined the unit together, and then about a year and a half later, my brother actually got a full-time job for the Guard. So my brother did his entire military career in the Guard full-time. And he ended up actually retiring as an E7. No, I'm sorry, as an E8. He was a first sergeant. And then he, I think, again, it was 23 or 24 years. And so he ended up getting that full-time job. He ended up leaving the unit, and probably 6 months later, the unit got mobilized to go to Iraq. So that was like a whole different, like, then life changes again,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because they were saying that the reserves were pretty heavily utilized.
Yeah, they were relied upon. And that was the thing too, is like even in the teaching that I've done today, it's like I'm on social media. I don't profess to do more than what I did in the military. It's like I was a very proud Wisconsin National Guardsman. The one thing I'll say about the Guard is that some people may lose sight of is that all these people bring their civilian intelligence when they get activated. So it's amazing their problem-solving capabilities, and this is no disrespect to our regular forces, but you are really bringing a lot of subject matter experts into that environment that may not have had that opportunity to learn that in the regular forces. So, there was a lot of positive things that came out of that. But I ended up getting activated to go to Iraq in it was March. No, I actually got activated in 2002, the fall of 2002, and then we ended up getting deployed. I actually scanned my ID card in Iraq in 2003.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll take a quick break here.
Sure.
And then we'll start with Iraq.
Sure. Cool.
So we are back. So hopefully everybody enjoyed their break.
Yes. Thank you.
So, all right. So we left off with you getting called to Iraq.
Yeah. So the unit actually got mobilized. We went to. Let me step back. I was working at the hospital. My phone rings. I get a phone call. It's the unit. They're saying, "Are you in a place where you can listen to this message?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they have a form message that they have to read you that basically says that you are being activated to active duty in support of our Operation Iraqi Freedom, blah blah blah. And then it's like, "Do you acknowledge this?" And you have, it's yes. And then they tell you when you have to report. So I think I had maybe a week, if not 2 weeks, to kind of like get stuff together, get it in order. And then we ended up reporting to the Armory, and then we went out to Fort Drum, New York. I spent, I don't remember, I think it was four or 5 weeks approximately out at Fort Drum, and that was basically like mobilization training, to kind of like, bolster your soldiering skills. So they had all these different classes. They had all these different stations that you had to go to, and essentially you had to be checked off on all these skills. And then all the units had to get checked off, and then subsequently that's kind of what made them eligible to be deployed. And then we also rail loaded all of our vehicles. So I've never been involved in doing that. But they
Rail loaded?
like the rail cars. Oh, so they actually have a depot where you load your own vehicles on the rail cars, and then they have like trained workers that come and make sure that like the turnbuckles and all that stuff are secure, the metal things and then your stuff goes and it gets put on a ship. And then when we got into country, which was Kuwait, when you get into the country, you go to Kuwait, then you wait for your ship to come in, literally, and then you go and pick up your vehicles.
Yeah.
So we did that. So yeah, we basically ended up getting on a 747. They flew us over. We landed, I think, in Czech Republic, and we were able to get off the aircraft and kind of like, literally there was like a gate that says you can't go past this gate, and it was like one of those metal gates that they close, like they bring together like a scissors gate. And there's Czech people on the other side of it. It almost felt, it was really weird, like you're waving at them, and all the guys like, "Hey, there's Czechoslovakian ladies," and you're reaching through the wire at them, and it was just typical military, like, get back on the plane, don't buy any duty-free alcohol. So basically get on the aircraft, you fly. I remember we flew into Kuwait. It was at night. It had this like really like stagnant, humid, salty smell, jet fuel. We were at the airport. Basically, you unloaded all your stuff. You get on a bus, and they literally take you out into the middle of the desert. Yeah. And then there's camps that are set up, and they were like, we were at Camp Virginia, and so we got there. We were in these huge tents that they already had like cots set up. You throw your stuff on there, and they had a big air conditioning unit. And if you were lucky enough to kind of be close to one of those, it was nice when it was hot out. But yeah, basically we spent our time there. We went out in the desert, and that's like where they had you do all your weapons firing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was.
How were you feeling at this point?
I think I was excited.
Yeah.
I was really excited. Like, I was full on like we're doing this. This is a great thing. 100% all on board, excited. We spent, like I said, we spent a lot of time. We waited for our vehicles to come, then we had to load all of our stuff. And then the command, they're making us like run around we basically ran around in the desert. Yeah. One of the events that happened is we did a lot of live fire in the desert. We ended up having a circumstance where one of the soldiers didn't clear their weapon, and they had a negligent discharge, and it actually shot one of the other soldiers in our unit. And it actually hit him in the leg. I remember it hitting him like high up in the leg, and the bullet actually came like out his ankle. And so that was an M16. Like it was like, and the distance, 75 feet. It was like we're all standing in it. I was like, really? Mm-hmm. I mean, because they gave us live ammunition, and then they came around and they cleared your weapon. Is your weapon clear? Well, yeah, weapon's clear. And in some circumstances, they actually like took a rod and they put it down your barrel to make sure there was nothing in it. Well, this person didn't clear their weapon, and then we did another drill, which was not involving any live firing, and they squeezed the trigger and the round was in the chamber. So it could have been anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, we were like in a gaggle of people.
Yeah.
So that guy actually ended up getting flown out of the country. He lived, but he bled a lot. And he lived, and then he subsequently had some pretty significant nerve damage in his leg. But he, that was his deployment. He's done.
Yeah.
And he's out of the military. So, yeah, that was a big deal. Like, that was like, holy, it really hits the point home, like, where I will say on the side of the, like, whether you work for the, the conventional military, whatever branch you're in, or even furthermore when you're working in the special operations community, those guys oftentimes, people are handling their weapons so much more than the Guard and the Reserves are, and have probably greater opportunities to do live fire and be around like a loaded weapon, where, it usually happened on an annual basis for us. And now we're out there and they're like, here's your ammunition, here's your ammunition, here's your ammunition. Well, people that have a sense of, it kind of takes you back to like hunter safety. Like literally don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to destroy something type of thing. But
and people don't realize it's a perishable skill. Especially something like that. You don't do it on a regular basis. Yeah. You forget those gross and fine motor movements.
And to be honest, it's not to profess it. I was like Johnny Rambo. I just I had please. I just had I think more of a sense of the firearm safety aspect because of hunting. I think there's a direct correlation. I just was very careful. Like, this is a tool that really isn't going to hurt anybody until I make it hurt somebody. You got to be careful.
Yeah.
And so we did that. We trained for a while. We got all of our gear, and then they call it like the push over the berm, where you are literally driving through the desert on a nicely 2-lane paved road that the United States put that right through the desert, basically into Iraq. So I actually got into Iraq in 2004.
Okay, and then you guys are driving Humvees at this time?
We had some Humvees, and then we also had the old Deuce and Half, which is a 2.5-ton truck.
Yeah.
Probably was World War II. Definitely used in Vietnam.
Just personnel carriers or whatever.
No, it was a 6-wheel drive. It was a truck that had 2 wheels in the back. They had dualies in the back, dualies, and then a single wheel in the front. So 2 sets of dualies in the back. So 2.5 tons. Had like almost looked like a covered wagon on the back, and then we had like Humvees, and some of the Humvees had like turrets on them, but we had no armor. We were basically a medical support company. We were actually escorted up to Baghdad, which is where we ended up going, by a company that ran gun trucks, and they did convoy security. They could have been an engineer unit. It doesn't matter. They basically had I say hillbilly armor because this is well before they had like legitimately up armored Humvees.
Yeah.
And these guys were running like plate steel, open back Humvees with sandbags all over them. They had somebody in a turret or maybe in the back of this vehicle that had a machine gun on a swivel, and they basically are the ones that ran security for us. And so they gave us like a briefing, basically what to do, what not to do. If we take contact, what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to drive through it. You're supposed to shoot through the contact. It was a 2-day trip. We were supposed to stop at one place in the middle, kind of like halfway through. And when we got there, the place was full. So we ended up like sleeping outside the wire. Which, again, to the uninitiated, I don't really remember where I was. But we were, I guess anywhere could have been hostile, but, the big push is already done. So you hate to make assumptions that everything behind that push is safe, but, it was really an uncomfortable feeling. Like, nobody slept, but we slept in our vehicles, and we had our weapons out there. Your weapons sticking out the window. And we pushed into Baghdad. We actually had a base that was it was at the international airport. It was Saddam Hussein International Airport, which was then changed to Baghdad International Airport. So it was affectionately referred to as BIOP. So we followed on to an existing unit. So there was already a unit there. So we slept in tents for a while we transitioned over. We basically had a battalion aid station or a treatment facility that was to take care of wounded service people. So we set that up. And then the other unit left, and and it was really weird. Where we stayed was old Saddam barracks. So they were, I mean, for the environment, they were actually pretty safe. I mean, they were like really well entrenched, really thick concrete barracks. The United States, your tax dollars bought a lot of air conditioning units. Thank you for that. And also generators. Like
I wasn't paying tax at the time.
Oh, okay. Well, I thank your parents, right?
Yeah.
Thank your parents. But I mean, like, look, the amount of money for infrastructure was insane. Everything was run on a generator, and these generators were like the size of a Connex, like a shipping container.
Mm-hmm.
And they had most areas had two. They would run one, do maintenance on the other, change oil, blah blah blah, clean out the air filters, and then turn that one on, switch the power over, and that's so. So they have I still to this day have to sleep with sound, and that is the droning sound that I remember from a generator. It was never quiet, and when it's quiet now, I have ringing in my ears.
It's a tinnitus or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, or it's just like I don't like. Sometimes when it's quiet, you're alone with your own thoughts, and so I don't like that.
Yeah.
So the sound, for whatever reason, helps to drown that out. So I sleep with an air purifier on. You know, It's like it's what it is.
Yeah.
But I basically we got settled in, and then I got pulled for a separate duty on the same complex. There was it was called the High Value Detainee. It was called Camp Cropper. Camp Cropper was named after a soldier that had been killed. But Camp Cropper was where it was called the HVDs, or High Value Detainees, were kept. And then so I found out once we got in there. For people that might be listening to your podcast, early in the war in Iraq, they had a deck of cards, and the deck of cards had all the faces of all the criminals of Iraq. Well, that deck of cards was at this camp.
Okay.
So, with the exception of a couple, there was one general that wasn't on there. I think the general had died before getting captured, or so I was led to believe, from some illness. And then, obviously, Saddam's kids got rolled up by our special operations forces, so they were not there. They were subsequently went on to greener pastures. But everyone else was there, including Saddam.
So what did they do with the deck of cards?
Well, I think the deck of cards was put out as more of a morale thing.
Okay.
But for us, when we were, we're in our little hooches that night, we're like, let's get the deck of cards out and let's see if we know who these people are, because we weren't. Everybody had a number.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have names, so we would actually look at the deck of cards and go, oh, that's so and so. So like by the time we knew who all these people were, all their names. Obviously, we didn't call them by their names. Many of them spoke perfect English. And what we did for the first 2 months I was there is we basically met their medical needs while they were in this detention facility. While they were at the detention facility, the United States and probably other intelligence agencies had like interview rooms that were there, and they would literally come and take these people, and they would interview them. And I can only imagine what they were interviewing about. They were probably looking for the weapons of mass destruction. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that half-heartedly. They probably were looking for it. Yeah. But they were interviewed, and then we basically met their medical needs and make sure that they were actually being taken care of as set forth by the International Red Cross. Okay. So, that also happened back when I was there. The Abu prison debacle came out when I was deployed, and that I was not at that facility. That was actually a prison that was not that far away. I was actually at a smaller detention facility that was supposed to be secret that everybody seemed to know about. But and so we basically did that day in and day out. We took care of these people, medications, making sure that one of the big things for the Red Cross is they wanted to make sure that enemy prisoners of war did not. They wanted to make sure they weren't losing weight, like they weren't being malnourished, or they weren't being treated right, mistreatment. Which the whole time I was there, I honestly say I never saw anybody mistreated. Quite honestly, it would be maybe to the contrary, where they were treated quite well. They were not common criminals. They were, political prisoners, or but like Chemical Ali was there, the guy that gassed the Kurds. Yeah. There was people that were part of their chemical warfare. There was a female scientist that was in prison there. I mean, like his brother was there. Basically anybody that you would see on that deck of cards, if you were to even look at it today, they were all there with the exception of 3 or 4.
Now, are they in like rooms, or they
were
cells?
In a 10 by 10 cell. Yeah. They had a little slit that they could open up and look out. They had a sleeping mat. In that part of the country, they don't use a conventional toilet. They actually have like a toilet that they stand over to defecate. Mm-hmm. So that there was I think this facility was
like a bedpan.
Yeah, well, it was a hole in the floor.
Oh, really?
And then they basically had a spigot with a hose where they could clean it off. I honestly think this facility was already some type of a detention facility before we didn't build this.
Yeah.
This was already like a Saddam era detention facility. And so they were all in these cells. They were let out multiple times a day. They received food. The United States even created a special meal that was for the Islamic faith that didn't have was consistent with what their diet was.
Yeah, like vegetarian.
Yeah, and they don't eat pork. Yeah. They don't eat pork. So there was pork, and there might be something else.
Yeah, I think we're pork-eating devils or something.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Yeah, I'll take it.
Especially when they're Yugoslavian boars.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Russian boars.
Yes, boars.
Yes. That's what I did.
One of the two.
I'd like to hear more. So yeah, I mean, I basically did that for three months. I had an opportunity, so I was there with a medic, myself, and there was a physician. Well, the doctor, he would go away every day for a couple hours, and the guy was a colonel, full-board colonel at the time, and he'd always be like, I have to go for my daily walk, and I'd be like, oh, okay, whatever. Didn't really think about it. What it ended up being was he was Saddam Hussein's doctor. And Saddam was actually kept at the opposite end of this detention facility by himself. He was segregated from everybody else. And so the doctor would go and see him every day. And so, because the U.S., again, did a fantastic job of really trying to make sure that the guy stayed in good health. Maybe until he could be executed. Well, right. But I mean, just to be consistent
he
with...
He will die when we tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, the medical care provided, I thought, was actually quite good. But so he would go see him, and then, I don't remember exactly the time frame, but I ended up getting one. There was a guard that came in and said, "Hey, Sergeant Cook, we need your help." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so he escorted me down there, and I'm like, "Where am I going?" He's like, "Well, they didn't call him Saddam, they called him Victor. That was his code name, Victor or whatever." And he's like, "Well, we need you to draw blood from one of the detainees." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, no problem." I did it all the time. Yeah. So I ended up kind of going to this one room, and then there was someone from another agency, whatever agency it was for the United States. And he's like, "Okay, you're going to be," he's like, "You know what you're doing?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm drawing blood." He's like, "Do you know who it is?" I said, "I have no idea who this is." I'm like, "Well, this is Saddam." So I'm like, then my finger got a little tight because I'm like, "Oh, I'm like, I better not miss." Right? And he's like, or I couldn't miss and just do it again. But, all kidding aside. So I ended up, and so when I got brought into Saddam's cell, it was the same size as everybody else's cell. But this dude stands up, and he was a fairly imposing guy. I mean, he was taller than me. Probably as tall as you are, bigger dude, probably not as buff as you, but he was put together. And he had like the traditional, like, man, we call it the man dress that they would wear. It was called like
man jammies.
Yeah, they called it the distasha, but his looked like he was pressed. And I'm like, what? Are we sending this guy's laundry out? So I come to find out later that he actually would clean his own, and he would actually put it under his cot and he'd sleep on it, and it would press it. So and I get ready to draw the guy's blood, and I sit down, I put the rubber band thing on his arm. And he reaches over and he hands me a baby wipe to wash my hands because I didn't have any running water. Like you would classically, And so I ended up wiping my hands off. I ended up drawing his blood a few times. So that was like my claim to fame. It's like, here's Chris from Maguanago, Wisconsin, and I'm like, kind of participating in the care of this guy. Yeah. So people are like, well, what does that feel like? And I'm like, well, I would equate him to. I'm not trying to say it's the same, but I would equate him to like the Hitler of my time in terms of what he did to his own people. And, some would say that maybe that's not a fair comparison, but to me, that's like, I was like totally evil. Yeah. Or I had this. But the one thing I will say is that the dude acted like he was going to be running the country again. Yeah. He was very regal. So, I mean,
committed to the end.
Yeah, he was committed to the cause, right? Mm-hmm. So, that was kind of the thing. Like I did that a little bit. And I spent my time there. We ended up having a few attacks on the camp, and I say that kind of half-heartedly, but that was the first time when I was over there that I actually like heard a bullet, like what it sounds like cracking by you, and I have no idea when you can hear it cracking how close it is, but I mean it's like I could like a crack snap sound, and then you could see it hitting something, and I'm like I was almost like what's that, and like we're getting we're under attack, blah blah blah, so. We had to get our weapons out of a locker, so it was, but so that didn't last real long, and that got quelled by they brought an M1 Abrams tank around, and I think he put a couple rounds down, and the little attack, whatever it was, stopped. And then we had rocket attacks quite a bit where they would have like an incoming rocket or mortar attacks. We were staying in hardened buildings, so I didn't feel too uncomfortable, but it would really suck to get blown up in the porta potty. So yeah, I mean, I did that for the first.
Especially when you're sweating your ass
Oh
off
yeah.
there.
I call that the Iraqi weight loss plan. So
yeah, keep stealing all your food.
oh my God, right? Yeah, that's funny that you say that. Yeah, I spent 24 hours in one of those once after eating some food on the economy after I was told not to. Needless to say, yeah. I never knew how many spiders came out at night. but yeah, so I did that, and I transitioned out of there, went back to our company area, and we ended up, basically what we did was we were just outside one of the main, they call them MSRs or supply routes, main supply route. We would, soldiers and Marines would actually get hit by IEDs, or they would actually have ambushes, and if they were close enough to our facility, the wounded people would come to us. Okay. And so we were doing mass casualty circumstances where we would take care of a fair number of injured people, and then just kind of outside where our facility was, we had
like Iraqi civilians and stuff.
We did service people, but we also did take care of civilians as well. And then during those non-critical hours, which I guess could have been any time, we had like an open clinic. Mm-hmm. So the civilians could actually be escorted into the base, and then we would take care of them. So I would argue that probably the best medical care that they've ever had. Yeah. And thank you, United States taxpayers. But again, as a medical provider, I wasn't there to judge a civilian. No. We did the very best we could. If Dan was an Iraqi civilian and he had high blood pressure, I could give him a month's worth of medicine, but I may never see him again. Yeah. So it wasn't that they always had consistent care, but if they were injured, or if like there was civilian casualties related to an IED attack or a mortar attack, those were very indiscriminate. We would be taking care of, there was kids that were blown up. There's a lot of impressions of things that I remember. It wasn't like, there was just a lot to see, and it wasn't every day, and it wasn't like, I was never a door-kicking person. That was not what my job was. I would like to believe that I was there to help take care of them should they have gotten injured. There was also a detention facility that was like right down the street from where we were at, and that's like when the Special Operations Forces would like roll up like bombers and stuff like that. They would be brought to one of these detention facilities, and they got a medical screening, and then they were basically interviewed. So we would help do like the medical screenings.
Interviewed with water.
Yeah, well, yeah, we got showers. Let's say it. But it's interesting because like what they would do in one case in particular, I was going over there to do some screening. They had these guys lined up and they had blindfolds on. Actually, no, they had like sandbag bags over their heads, and they had laid out like mortars on the ground, and they took their sandbags off, and these guys looked down and they started crying. And then they have an interpreter. I mean, they crying probably because they knew they got caught. But I don't speak fluent. Arabic. It's Arabic. It's Arabic. So I mean, just a few cursory words, but it was just interesting. Like these guys, like I think they knew they were caught. Yeah. But yeah, it was just a really weird circumstance. Like played volleyball sometimes. The food was pretty amazing. Every Friday night they had steak and lobster. What? Every Friday night, steak and lobster.
You're welcome.
Now, yeah, thank you, United States taxpayers. Wow. Yeah. But I will say that it wasn't very good, steak and lobster.
It's terrible.
Well,
It's the worst steak and lobster I ever had.
I mean, think about how many thousands of steaks and how many thousands of lobsters. It was like eating a rubber band. But I mean, it was
it's still steak.
It was steak and lobster, right?
That morale boost.
Yeah, I think after a while it wasn't really that boosting because I think it made everybody constipated. But what was interesting is that like you'd walk into these chow halls and it was all like I think KBR was the Kellogg Browning Root Halliburton were the ones that actually support all this, and there was a lot of the Filipinos they had hired to actually, so they were always very friendly. Like they have salad bars, all this food. It was pretty cool actually. So.
Yeah, I mean, got to be kind of weird. You're almost transplanted from one hospital to another.
Yeah.
You're just in a different country.
Yeah. It's exactly like. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. So how long were you stationed there?
I spent, I know the first 3 months that I was there, I was at camp proper. Probably close to another 3 months at BIOP, or Baghdad International Airport, which was really, they were very close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then what ended up happening that to kind of like further the circumstances, that on September 11th, 2004, we ended up doing a mission. We were going to run from the international airport to the green zone, which, again, that was an area that was kind of downtown Baghdad. There was a hospital there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was essentially an Americanized hospital. The United States basically ran the hospital. So it had all the amenities, CAT scan, I don't know if it had an MRI, but nonetheless, CAT scan, surgery, emergency room. And so they, like when the casualties came in, they got funneled into this hospital. So we ended up running a mission to go down to the hospital. This was, again, September 11th, 2004. It was myself. I was actually the TC, not tank commander, it's truck commander. Mm-hmm. And we basically had 3 vehicles that all had, they were either like an M249 machine gun or an M2, which is a 50 cal. And they basically were our gun trucks, and they escorted us down to the green zone. We got almost to the green zone, and the United States forces were on the side of the road, and they were kind of like basically holding us up. What ended up happening is up ahead there was an IED that someone had put in the side of the road. So we either had an opportunity to kind of flip a UE, and when I say doing a U-turn, it would be like turning around on 50, like going down into the median and then coming back up on 50. So that there's a fairly large green space there. So that was the same there. It was a main thoroughfare. It was a 3-lane highway with a very large median that was pretty much palm trees and dirt. And so we ended up getting stopped. They said they had found an IED up ahead, and my commander opted to. He said, hey, instead of like going on, we'll pull security. We'll wait for them to clear the IED, and then we'll continue on the green zone. So we ended up dismounting out of our vehicles. The guys that were manning the crew serve weapons were staying in the turrets. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was facing in the direction that we came from. So I think I was probably facing south, if that's like a cardinal direction. And we were there for a period of time. I know the Iraqi National Guard had showed up, and there was an off ramp, and the Iraqi National Guard was pushing the oncoming traffic off the on ramp, so they didn't really encroach where we were standing. And after a period of time, I noticed up ahead that there was a vehicle that it pulled itself out of the normal flow of traffic, and it was basically driving on the rumble strip right at our location, like right where we were standing. Mm-hmm. And so Dan's heard me say this before. I don't really know what made me react, but I ended up firing my weapon. I shot the driver. I hope I did. I shot the driver through the windshield. I remember shooting 2 rounds out of my M16, aiming at his head. Actually, I was aiming I remember specifically I was aiming like right here in what I perceived to be where I was aiming.
Yeah. And
then the car blew up. Probably 30 to 40 feet from where I was standing. The car detonated. So I just remember raising my rifle. I remember thinking to myself, if Dan as a police officer is standing on the side of the road and someone's coming like that, they're going to run him over, right? Yep. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get run over. And I don't really know what made me think otherwise, regardless of getting run over or not. That's why I ended up shooting. Mm-hmm. And it was just really that quick. And then the car detonated. That was even faster. And I just remember this huge ball of flame. I subsequently got thrown down to the ground. I don't really remember that. I remember kind of coming to. A few things I remember coming to. I remember coming to that and I couldn't hear. Like I had ringing in my ears. And,
that was damn close.
Yeah. And one of the things that for those people that really have watched like Saving Private Ryan, I will say that the closest thing that I could equate that to is the beach scene. Like when they're actually coming onto the beach and those rounds are going off, and then you can kind of hear that ringing in your ear, and you can kind of hear yourself talk in your head. That was really what I could equate to what it sounded like for me, but I remember that I kind of came to, I had ringing in my ears and I couldn't see. Like
Let me ask you,
yeah.
you and I never talked, did you guys have headset?
No.
So no hearing protection?
No, and we didn't have any armor either. So like, even being in our vehicles, I mean, and I think with a bomb of that sort, and again, I'm not an explosives expert, you can only imagine what was in that vehicle. It was an orange car. I'll never forget the color. It was an orange, like an Impala, like an older, like Impala-ish kind of Caprice kind of ish car. Then again, things you just don't forget. But I had no hearing protection. What I had on was I had Aviators Nomex gloves on, and I had Wiley X ballistic glasses on. My Kevlar helmet, my Kevlar vest, and I had this little piece that hangs down between your legs called a cod piece, which which was supposed to protect your genitals, right? Thank God. But so when I ended up coming to, like I said, I had this ringing in my ears and I really couldn't see very well. And what I ended up doing is I did two things. The first thing I did is I kind of took my hand and I remember I flipped my goggles off and I could see. So my vision was obscured by the fact that my goggles were completely destroyed with whatever.
Yeah.
And then I remember grabbing on. I was laying right next to one of the Humvees, and it wasn't mine. And I grabbed onto the brush guard to stand up. And when I went to try to stand up, I couldn't lift myself up.
Huh.
And so I looked down. I remember looking down. I remember seeing my left leg was turned around backwards, and I could see that my pants were torn. I don't remember if it was specifically bone sticking through or not, but I remember that my pants were filling up with blood and that I couldn't get up. So I tried to call for help, and I screamed for help, but I couldn't hear myself scream. I just kept saying, I need help me, or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. So what I did was, when we did the training, it was like one of those things where I was like, the training was, well, a lot of times when they do it in IED, they have multiples, and then they follow up with an ambush. So I was like, well, if I don't move, I'm going to get shot. So I crawled by dragging myself on my elbows away from the vehicle, not very far. And I remember we had been given tourniquets, weeks before this, right? And I remember, someone gave me one, and our supply guy had gotten them, and it was like, oh, I put it on my vest. I'm like, hey, on my vest I had a place where I kept my sunglasses. I'm like, because that's where the cool guys kept them. Everybody else kept them there. I'm going to keep them there. So I put my tourniquet in there, and there wasn't much room for it. And I'm like, if I have to use the tourniquet, I'm going to figure out how to use it, and I'm probably going to use it on somebody else. So I took no time to learn how to use the tourniquet. Yeah. And so when I rolled over, I took the tourniquet out, and I was like all thumbs. And it was in a plastic wrapper. And they're even still wrapped fairly tightly now, and I understand that. So I couldn't use I had no fine motor skills to actually take the wrapper off. So I remember actually using my teeth, and I actually was able to, with my teeth in my hands, I was to get the wrapper off. And I ended up putting the tourniquet around just below my knee. And I put it on, and I tightened it to what I believed as tight as it should be. To be honest with you, I really didn't assess how well it was on, or even if it was on correctly. I've learned since then it really wasn't the right way to do it. Mm-hmm. But I tightened it up pretty good because I remember my leg kind of hurt. And then two other soldiers came and grabbed me under my arms, and they dragged me. And I just remember my leg kind of like in the back, just kind of doing one of these in the sand. And they took me behind a Humvee, and they kind of laid me. They had a litter. They kind of laid me next to the Humvee, and I started coughing up blood, like bubbly, like blood that had bubbles in it. Yeah. And I'm like, obviously being a medical provider, I'm like, I think I have a lung injury. And so I'm like, you need to get my vest off. You need to see if there's any holes in me. You need to, and it was really weird how, and this isn't to be disrespectful to the other people, but I felt really confident even at that moment that I needed to do something to try to save my own life, or to like I said, I'm not all that in a bag of chips, but I had enough presence of mind to be like, we need to find out why I'm bleeding.
Yeah, that's repetition, experience in general.
So they lifted my vest up, and they rolled me over, and they said, hey, Sergeant, you got a piece of metal sticking out of your back. And I said, leave it alone. Just, if it's plugging a hole, leave it alone. And they, okay, and then I'm still kind of spitting up blood. I'm kind of spitting all of myself. And it's funny, I talked about having that cod piece on. I'm not going to lie. I stuck my hand underneath that, and I wanted to see if the junkyard was still intact. You know, I'm like,
you gotta have at least one win.
It's my
Important tools of the trade.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
if it's not, just take it out.
yeah. So I'm like, well, so I mean, it's funny as it sounds. It was like, okay, and then they ended up putting me on this litter. But when they picked me up, they didn't put my leg on the litter. So my leg was kind of draped over the side where the bone was like broken off.
Yeah.
And so they picked me up, put me on a litter, basically put me in this Humvee. And when you do a litter drill in a Humvee, the litter fits in sideways in the back seat, so the doors don't close. The poles stick out further than the actual seats. So I remember kind of laying there looking down, and I can damn near see like past the wheel well, or like where the door well is, and I can see the ground.
Yeah.
And so there's a guy that was there kind of holding on me, and he, I'm like, just hold on to me, don't let me fall out. And every time we would go around a corner, those doors would slam on the pole of the litter, and I could feel it through my body.
Yeah.
And it was like, and when people say, "Did you feel pain?" I didn't feel pain at first, but when I did feel pain, it felt like my leg was on fire.
Yeah.
I felt like it was burning. I had a burning pain. And then when I put the tourniquet on, I had a throbbing pain. Like the blood was, like it had nowhere to go. So it was like, it just bang, it throbbed.
Did they put another tourniquet on you? Or
No.
just the one below
Just
you?
the one that I had put on myself. They got me, and then the other thing I remember, I'm looking up, and I remember seeing there was a captain, there was an African American captain standing in the turret, and he had his M4 out, and he was pointing it at people, and he was basically saying a bunch of expletives to every single person he pointed this weapon at, so they could expeditiously get me to the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, it was MF for this, MF for that. I'll MF and shoot you. Move out of the way and all this. I remember those moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they got me to the ER. Basically, got me inside. They cut all your clothes off, and I remember kind of like looking. I wanted to see my leg, and some guys like, "Oh, don't take a look at it." And then I used the classic thing, like, "I'm a nurse." Like they don't really care. I'm a nurse. I want to see it. Type of some. I'm making it sound there was more bravado than there really was. But so I kind of look up and I'm like, oh my god, my leg's backwards. It's all bent. I can see my tibia bone and everything. And oh my god. And I'm like, I'm coughing up this blood. I'm coughing up blood. And I'm like, and so they rolled me over, and I had a piece of the car was sticking onto my back, and they pulled it out and put a piece of plastic on it. And the guy's like, "Do you want to save this?" And I remember stupid stuff like that, and it's like, oh, whatever. So, yeah, I was like, and then the surgeon.
So, all right, let me ask you, because Chris and I have talked about this, but not these days. So when they put the did you have a pneumothorax? Is that?
Good question, Dan. You've listened to my lectures.
No, but we've never talked about that. But the idea that
they did, I did not. What ended up happening, and that's a good point. The way the metal went in, it didn't go into my lungs. It went on the outside of my lungs. It was like it skipped my lungs, and it stayed in the space between my chest and my lungs.
So what was causing the bubbles then?
I had shrapnel that went through my nose, and it was making my nose bleed, and I was swallowing it and spitting it back up.
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
Okay.
So the metal did not penetrate my lung, so my lung didn't pop.
Okay.
It actually went on the outside of it, and it was probably about 8 inches long of metal.
So when they put that plastic on it, it didn't help.
No, I think they were just doing it because that would be the treatment that you would do before they would actually do something further.
So they didn't insert one of those bone piercings in your nose?
No.
So, I guess you know what a pneumothorax is?
No.
Well, essentially, it would be like if the penetrating injury would have actually perforated the lung, and my lung actually would have deflated. The air takes the path of least resistance, so if the hole's bigger here than it is in here, it'll start going in here, and that actually creates a whole other set of problems. Typically, in trauma, if you have a pneumothorax, pneumo meaning air, chest meaning thorax, in trauma, usually you have bleeding that comes along with it, so they call it a hemopneumo, blood, air. So I didn't have any of that, which was, again...
So basically what happens is your lung collapses.
Yeah.
So they have to cover that so that it can reinflate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, he's right. So I didn't have that. The orthopedic surgeon came down. He's like, Sergeant Cook, we're going to take good care of you. I think he probably did some magical stuff and tried to do a little look over here. And as he was doing that, he straightened my leg. And I'm like, can I have some effing pain medication? So he basically, what they did is they straightened my leg the best they could. And then they took a rope and they tied my leg to the bed so it wouldn't flop. And they're like, we're going to get you to surgery as soon as we can. So, yeah, I mean, that was, they took some x-rays, I didn't have the pneumothorax like Dan had suggested. The blood was coming from my nose. I had burns all over my face. I said I had those pilot gloves on. Those gloves are intended to provide protection for a flash, and they were nearly completely burned off my hands, but my hands didn't burn.
Thank God for the gloves.
The goggles, like the Wiley X goggles, saved my vision. I looked like a raccoon, but my face looked like it had gravel embedded in it. It had flash burns. Can I
interrupt you?
Yeah, for sure.
Like your gloves, like whatever happened to all that stuff?
I don't know what I don't know. I do know what happened to my helmet. My helmet and my vest actually made it back to my company. So my vest literally looked like someone shot me at close range with multiple shotgun shells. I mean, like it was torn up, and I had a lot of blood on the inside, and I think that was like that chest injury was bleeding. And then my helmet, the inside of my Kevlar helmet, if you were to take the helmet off, like in the Army, the rank's like right here. If you were to take the helmet off and look inside, there was a piece of metal that was coming through the inside of the helmet.
But it stopped it.
Jeez.
So I haven't always historically considered myself to be a religious person. Sadly, I say that. I am certainly a very spiritual person, and I also feel as if I don't feel it. I know that I was protected. That is probably the most emotional part about it, is that the totality of the event that occurred, I should have been killed.
Yeah.
And I didn't die. And that was the biggest mental health issue I had, is that I could not understand why I lived.
You had God's armor on that day. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Can I back up for a second?
Yeah.
How many people were injured in that?
So there was 9 injured all told, and 1 Iraqi citizen that was killed.
But no U.S. military people.
Correct. We're not killed. Yeah. So I ended up having surgery. I ended up going through 20 surgeries. All told, they saved my leg. I ended up having like an external fixator, which is like a rector set, and then went through surgeries at Walter Reed. One of the things I wanted to step back about that I think also further speaks to the spiritual aspect of it is my grandfather that I had alluded to on my mom's side had passed away a long time ago, like when I was in 8th grade. And when I ended up getting hurt, I had a moment where my grandfather spoke to me. And he just said to me, he's like, "Chris, it's not your time." That's all he said. But it was in my grandfather's voice. That is always, it's always really stuck with me. So when you deal with that, like the physical aspect of it is, there's a temporary component to the physical pain. And as you guys are all well aware, there's a lasting component of the emotional discomfort that you deal with. Having an opportunity to speak about this is always very positive for me.
Yeah.
And obviously everybody handles certain traumas in a different way, but I went through the physical aspect. I spent the better part of 2 years at Walter Reed. I was actually at the time living in Elkhorn.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? Because I think you touched on something.
Yeah.
And Nick, I mean, I know that you're a spiritual person. Like, I believe in God. I know you found your faith as well. And I've said this to Chris before, but I think it bears saying again, is your grandfather, you never told me about your grandfather, but I think it's really interesting because you're right, there's no reason for you to be here,
Nope.
right? However, being a spiritual person and knowing faith, I have a person in my life that tells me God has a plan for you. When you walk through these dark times, there's a reason why, not to go down this spiritual hole. God's plan for you was to save more lives. Yeah. And I'm not jumping ahead here, but through Chris's trauma, he has traveled this country, and as a direct result of what he taught me, I've been able to save lives. So he's saved lives downstream because God needed you to be here. So anyways, go on.
You can look at the event that caused it all. Like, I mean, if he wouldn't have taken that shot, that car would have drove into the entire group, and
killed everybody.
There would have been everybody dead.
But even you said, why did I do that? Why?
Yeah.
That's not something you thought about doing.
No.
You're in medical, but like literally, car's coming, raise your rifle, fire 2 rounds, blow yourself up, you live. What happens?
Yeah.
And I can tell stories in law enforcement. There's times where I shouldn't be here. Why did it happen? Obviously, there was something else I needed to do on this earth.
I think for me, it's like you said, there is a plan. God has a plan for us. I've done a really good job through my life of trying to destroy that plan, though.
And you still fail.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
that's called being a good Christian. You fail in front of him constantly, but that's the thing about him is you ask for his forgiveness and you ask for his help and he'll give it to you.
And you're forgiven right away.
Yeah.
And I understand those self-destructive tendencies because I've gone through those even in my career, and I've obviously never experienced what.
It's all relative. We always talk about it's always relative in your situation.
But I think Chris experienced a lifetime of traumatic injuries in 30 seconds, and then not to get ahead of what you went through, but I think that literally one major event, not only did it change your life, it altered your path, it gave you clearance or a clear vision, right? And then you've also consciously and subconsciously tried to destroy yourself multiple times, and you're still here. So, anyways, you're living in Elkhorn and Walter Reed.
No, I know. I really appreciate that. That's a fantastic interjection because I probably wouldn't have said it that way. That's good.
But I think it's true. It is, and this and I've again, not to be a fanboy, but I'm a big fan of Chris Cook, and he's done so many good things, and I won't get off on a tangent, but he's a true hero. Not that day he saved all those lives, but even moving forward in everything he's done since then, the people that he's impacted in a positive way, you can't put words to it. You can't go to college and get that education. There's just an inside drive and desire that never has left him. So
I appreciate that.
Anyways.
Yeah, no,
back to Walter Reed.
No, I spent the better part of 2 years at Walter Reed, going through medical procedures, and they did a fantastic job. They had a trauma team that did a fantastic job of being able to save my limb. But I mean, that's also an environment too. You go there, and I would be in. I mean, they would try to do some mental health stuff, which I appreciated. When you go to these group sessions, and there was guys that were there that were younger than I, and they had brain injuries, and they literally had like a hockey helmet on with a bib, and there's spit, there's drools on the bib, and they're holding their newborn baby. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, wow, I'm lucky. I mean, I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm so lucky.
These are also other casualties.
These are all casualties. Yeah. I mean, like guys that were one day they were talking like you and I, and the next day, like I said, they literally they're drooling in a bib. Yeah. Or I had a guy that was next to me who was in the Air Force that got hit by a mortar. He had one arm left, and he got married at Walter Reed. Like his fiance stuck with him. I mean, he would go through skin grafting, and you could hear him screaming. It was like, that's trauma in itself, right? You don't really think about it, but I'm also I'm in the environment with the same people that we've all experienced an event to different degrees, but the common denominators that were there. And I think Walter Reed did a fantastic job. The facility itself was old and very decrepit, but the people and the hearts of the people that were there were unmatched. I mean, I remember there was a guy, they called him the milkshake man. His name was Jim, and Jim was a Vietnam vet that lost both of his legs. Jim would come around once a week and he'd go to all the rooms and ask what flavor of McDonald's milkshake he wanted. And he would bring them back. And he had 2 legs that had prosthetics, so he kind of had that shuffly walk, and the dude came every week.
Probably gave him purpose.
And he, and just kind of the same thing, like hang in there. I've been where you've been, and he's obviously been there. There was another organization that actually, which I think is really important to acknowledge. There was a restaurant called Fran O'Brien's that was in the basement. I think it was the Hilton or the Marriott in D.C. Don't remember and Fran O'Brien was friends of Jim, and Fran was also a veteran from Vietnam. And he actually started on Wednesday nights a free steak dinner feed and they started with bringing like a short bus, no pun intended, to Walter Reed, and taking any able-bodied service people to Fran O'Brien's for a night of fellowship, steaks, cocktails, which didn't always go well with pain medication. But this got so big that they were bringing Greyhound buses, and they were bringing special adaptive buses to take guys that are in wheelchairs that like are moving stuff around with their lips. And they took them to the freight elevator in the back because they didn't have an elevator. They bring them down and they bring them into this restaurant. And that, I'll never forget that. Like, I'll never, and that restaurant closed because the hotel said that eventually that looked poorly for the hotel to see all the wounded soldiers, service people. That was partially related to why. And I also think they were doing all this on their own dime.
Yeah.
And so they ended up starting to get some supporters and stuff. But, I mean, those are, you know, like when you're in your worst moment and sitting in Walter Reed, you know, I was fortunate to have family be able to come fairly frequently, but when they weren't there, like you just sit in your own self-pity on pain medication in a haze.
Yeah.
You know, and even if you were in a group of people that were all in the same haze, you were still kind of together. And, you know, I had this erector set on, and so I was in a wheelchair for a while, and I went to Fran O'Brien's with a walker, and I think I went to Fran O'Brien's with crutches. But, I mean, like, it was just, it's really worth mentioning because there's other people that have been there that know what I'm talking about. And it was just like, it was a place to make you feel normal.
Yeah, it gives you the opportunity to snap out of the humdrum of being in a hospital.
Yeah. Yes. You know, and then I ended up getting released from Walter Reed. I was still attached to them by the military standards because I was still active duty. I ended up being able to come home. You know, I transitioned kind of out of the Elkhorn area, and I was able to kind of do some things on my own. You know, and I was able to actually transition back to work. But interestingly, when I was living in Elkhorn, you know, I had made friendships with, like I had said, a lot of the law enforcement people. And one of the things I always wanted to do when I was working at Lakeland is I wanted to help out the SWAT team.
Yeah.
Right? And it was really interesting. So I don't remember exactly how I ended up meeting Tom Hauser, I think he's the current undersheriff now. And I don't remember how that relationship ended up being developed, but it was like, hey, you know, they kind of brought me around. I think I was still using a cane when I first came. I was not really 100%, but then I ended up just started kind of doing some of the medical care for the SWAT operators. And then as I became a little bit more able-bodied, then I was actually like going on operations. I would go to training. I would go on operations with them. And I was, you know, and there was others. It wasn't just me, but I was certainly, I would like to believe I was certainly the most invested medical provider, both emotionally and physically invested in wanting to be, because it gave me purpose. You know, these guys became my brothers, and I have one sitting next to me. Like they became my brothers, much like I had when I was in the military, right? And you know, and through that you develop friendships, and you know, like I said, Dan is truly a brother, and having been able to do the SWAT stuff, and I did it for 10 years before I kind of moved out of the area. But
so you're just supporting medically?
It was called TEMS, Tactical EMS Support, or, you know, so basically your primary responsibility is you are a medical provider that is there to take care of the SWAT guys. And obviously if someone were a civilian would be injured, or a bad guy would be injured, you would still take care of them. But my primary role and responsibility was to take care of them. And that was something that I took completely serious. I had a good time, but it was like, you know, I mean, we had an operation that Dan and I were involved in, and Dan, I don't know what you did, your helmet, Dan was like literally, this is an active shooting circumstance that we had. It was in Sharon.
No, it was on off a highway north of Elkhorn.
Okay, north of Elkhorn. Okay.
So it is. So this. Right, so,
it's an important segment.
So to back up, Chris. All right. So Chris was brought on as a tactical EMS person, but his passion and drive for this literally set the standard for the entire nation. All right, to the point where moving forward, we were the first licensed TEMS team in the entire state of Wisconsin because of what he did. So he took a real negative in his life and turned it into a positive. and set the stage. So he says, I was there to take care of the SWAT cops. He did more than that. So he would set up landing zones. He would set up extrication points. We did extrication training, how to get wounded officers out. The TCCC, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care, tourniquet applications, wound packing. I mean, he made sure, because he was there, but if we had multiple officers that were injured, we all knew the same stuff that he did. And so it was December of 2010. SWAT call.
How do you remember that?
No, 2009.
No,
It was 2009. And
you made an impression.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, is because we had that call and then another one a week later, and we used more CS gas and tear gas in 2 SWAT calls than the entire city of New York did in 1 year, in a 2-week period.
Yeah.
It was great. It was nuts.
It didn't really work all that well.
And this particular SWAT call started about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. I was working shift, so I didn't have my SWAT gear with me. I get there, I respond up there, we get there, and I had borrowed a helmet from somebody, and at that point, this guy had moved from a house into a garage area. He shot at the our armored car, actually shot the window, and then shot another time. He shot at me and my partner as we were moving from cover to cover. So fast forward about 8 hours into this, and this was 13-hour SWAT call. 6 degrees. Yeah. 6 degrees outside. Yeah. And we literally threw everything at this guy who had barricaded himself in the garage, to the point where we moved up and we were going to hook a chain to his truck, and we were going to drag it back because we were going to start destroying this garage. Yeah. Either collapse it on top of him, or he was going to surrender. And right before we, the entry team, I was part of the entry team at the time, right before we move up to start this operation, this particular officer who was driving the Bearcat in the armored car opens the door and says, "Hey, Dan, can I have my helmet back?" I said, "What?" "Well, I'm going back to the command post. I don't want to lose my equipment." I said, "Can I give it back to you later?" "No, I really need to have it." Okay. So we go up there, and not 30 seconds later, this guy cracks off a rifle round that I felt it go right past my shoulder. And I'm not wearing a helmet. Yeah. And one of the guys fires around, and not less than a minute, door opens, and I feel his helmet come on my head. He's sitting inside the barricade. He's like, "Why don't you use this?"
It's the armor of God right there.
Yeah, or Chris. Yeah, but he was, I mean, yeah, it really was. I mean, and at that time, too, the SWAT team was a very active team. We were, so for those 2 years in a row, we were the SWAT team of the year, and we had anywhere between 10 to 20 SWAT calls a year as a part-time team. So we were very active.
That's busy.
Yeah, it was very busy, very active. So, but Chris kind of set the standard, and again, taking a negative and turning it into a positive. He was very passionate about it, and we were lucky to have him on the team because he really was very forward-thinking in a lot of different areas.
I think to say my influence was national is probably an overstatement, but I appreciate it.
Bullshit.
Do
you travel the country?
Well, I have. But I mean, like, I was. Let's just say I was a messenger. I was a messenger of smarter people. But I appreciate that. I think what it ended up being, there was a point in time when I made a conscious choice that I wanted to play it forward, right? But I wanted rather to pay it forward. I still say this. I said it the other day to somebody. I want to make this place better than the way I found it. Mm-hmm. And this is my mission. It's like my small contribution to continue to push forward. Right? We talked about this previously to coming over here. I've had a small business that I teach this, and I'm a terrible business person because I never make money because I do everything for free. Because the message is more powerful than the money.
That's the way PVM is for me. I don't even think about making money, but it's just, here you go.
And it's nice to have it, right? I mean, we all like to have it, but at the end of the day, it's the message, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I really never really put it in terms of being spiritual, but I think it is my ability to continue to have the hand of God push me in a direction that allows me to continue to help people. And I am a very imperfect person that has made a multitude of mistakes along the way that I'm very, I feel bad about. I really do. Like, it's things that would keep me up at night. And I guess to what you guys had said earlier, I think you you need to ask for forgiveness, but I also think you have to learn how to forgive yourself. And I have done a very poor job of that. Even to this day, it's
Forgive yourself.
just for like poor decision making. I mean, it's just the way. I mean, we're all hard on ourselves in a certain way, and that's the way I am. But at the end of the day, I mean, I still have the mission. I taught a class last week out in Pennsylvania. Or a week before I was out in Pennsylvania. I teach these classes at my brother's shop I was talking about. I'll pretty much teach it to anybody who wants to listen. But again, sadly, it's never been about making the money. Which as I can maybe see retirement in the future here, it's like you maybe want to have something that kind of helps you sustain a little bit. But
do you ever really want to retire?
No, and that's a really good point. I think I would want to transition to something different. Dan's point is, when I started those fires when I was a kid, would really never let me believe to the point now where I'm actually working for a fire department.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a frontline firefighter anymore. I'm actually one of the administrative chiefs for a department that I oversee all the paramedics. So it's still an opportunity for me to play it forward by still having some influence on people, particularly younger people. And one of the things that I try to really influence on them is that you still have to have compassion. I mean, I believe there is a time in our lives when violence may be necessary, but I also believe that there is a greater time in our life to have compassion. Mm-hmm. And obviously that violence is a general term for whatever we need to do in order to keep ourselves safe, our loved ones safe. But I think there's a greater opportunity for having compassion. I still think that is a focus that I have in my life.
Yeah, violence is really easy.
You're
it's
right.
easy.
Yeah.
Compassion's hard. It's
a good point.
It takes a real good human to have compassion. So and not a lot of people are even born with compassion. Because we're all kind of born primeval, and then our parents and stuff teach us compassion, empathy. So,
which probably circles back around to my parents. As I said, I think I always reference my dad. My mom is an absolutely stellar, wonderful person, and I don't mean to diminish her impact on my life because we're a lot alike. But my dad was a very even-keeled, compassionate guy. So I was able to see that, and I try to continue to replicate that in my life.
But I think too, you can have compassion for the people you harm.
oh, of course.
You know what I'm saying? Whether you're talking about the military or law enforcement, I mean, good people do bad things, but there's consequences for your actions. And so I can have compassion for you while doing what I need to do. And it's how I react to it, and am I comfortable doing those deeds, knowing that it's the only and it's the just way to resolve. Conflict resolution isn't sitting with crayons and talking. Conflict resolution is a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. The idea of having compassion. I think that for me, anyways, as I got later on in my career, I had more compassion versus less. Where a lot of people would say, that those types of careers will harden you, and I saw just the exact opposite. Because when you start to really get to know people, even the people that are really troubled, that are bad people. There's evil people that walk amongst us. But I think that the majority of people are still good people. Troubled? Sure. Yeah. Sociopaths? No, not so much. But those people do exist. And you can have compassion for them while still having to right a wrong. Or even having compassion for yourself and forgiveness for yourself, because all three of us sitting here are probably some of the most flawed individuals that walk the face of the earth. And that's
your
okay.
mouth to God's ears.
But there's a reason why we're here.
Yeah.
And we don't know why it is, but we are.
Well, we're willing to realize our flaws. There's a lot of people that don't even acknowledge their flaws.
Absolutely.
So if you can realize you have flaws, that's the biggest step forward you can take.
And I'm going to be a flawed person until the day I die. I accept that. But going back to Chris and what he's done. So a friend of ours, he's the fire chief in Lake Geneva, and Chris mentored John, and now John is in charge of the SWAT team. But a lot of that training has trickled down. City of Lake Geneva kind of set the standard in a lot of ways, and the patrolmen have this type of medical training that Chris had in the military because of him. And those modalities or those treatment options that he learned in the military that were very high-level things are now common amongst street-level patrol.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And that's why I go back and say that he truly is a hero.
The medical care that he's talking about is actually, it's called TECC, which is the civilian version of the military. Mm-hmm. It is now a core curriculum in all of the law enforcement academies in the state of Wisconsin. So if you're a new recruit going through a technical college, that is an 8-hour class that you are required to take and pass. And so I was fortunate to be among other people to help write the curriculum.
It never takes credit for anything. I was with a bunch of other guys.
It's not, I don't think a single person can do it. I mean, I am fortunate to be surrounded by really, really well-meaning, awesome people. I mean, would it be fair to say that maybe I was the impetus behind it? Yes. Tactical EMS in the state of Wisconsin. I mean, yes, I'm very proud to say that I was probably the plank owner of that, pushing it at the state. I would go to state meetings after state meetings after state meetings and do presentations on this. Mm-hmm. But it cannot be successful with one person. So I mean, I just have a hard time with that.
Yep, I know. That's why it brings me along. So.
It takes a team.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself? What are you doing in the future now? So like, what are you going to focus on?
Still working. Like I said, I would love to have that retirement indicator light flash. And
it's really dull.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of see it, but really, I would really like to continue this. As, like I said earlier, I would like to kind of further my side hustle. I don't want to call it a side hustle. It's a passion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice to be able to put gas in your tank. Maybe I think what becomes expensive is the training supplies. So, when there's money involved, usually it's just getting put back in the company to cover your costs, Mm-hmm. But what I need to continue to do, I think as long as there's breath coming out of my body, I need to be doing something like this in order to continue to make this world a better place. Mm-hmm. And even if it's a small thing, I don't think I know what's important. And I think it does circle back around. That's why I live. Mm-hmm. That's why I live. And I don't have to talk to you guys anymore. I know what you're saying, but it's like having that self-realization that I do know why I live, which is why I continue to do it. I mean, it waxes and wanes based on availability or income or whatever. But like I said, even having a chance to go out, it was for a business that is not involved in tactical stuff at all. I've done schools. The community that I live in, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've done nearly 400 teachers, paraprofessionals in the school, getting kits with fundraisers, getting kits into the schools. One of the things that is important to understand, particularly as it relates to our children, which obviously, it means a lot for both of you. Mm-hmm. The person that applies the first bandage saves the life. And in our case, it's our kids' teachers.
Mm-hmm. And when we've taught here in Lake Geneva, we've equipped every classroom with the individual first aid kits and did the training. Mm-hmm. And the teachers initially were very resistant to it. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't go to school with this. I can appreciate that. 100%. Right? But here's where I sold it to them is this isn't about you saving students. That it is. I said, but take this skill and apply it to an auto accident when you're driving late at night. Your children and you are injured. You know what I'm saying? Like this is a skill. It's not the active shooter traumatic injury thing. Take that and set it aside. Yeah. You could fall on a. We had a guy a couple years ago that tried to jump a fence and literally tore his femur from the knee all the way up to his groin, and he bled out. Right? Had nothing to do with a gunshot, but he was just a chucklehead that did that. We applied 2 tourniquets, packed the wound, and he's alive today, still being a pain in the butt. Yeah. But my point is
still jumping fences.
Yeah. But my point is that had nothing to do with gunshots. Right. It is every day. An industrial accident last year. A guy was slicing plastic, and all of a sudden felt something warm running down his leg. Well, his cowboy boot had already he sliced his femoral artery. Oh, Jesus! And his boot filled up with blood before he lost consciousness. Well, luckily, law enforcement and fire department got there. Somebody had already applied pressure, put a tourniquet on it. It's an industrial accident. So I mean, it's not specific to the battlefield. It goes with anything. Freya slices her arm. I mean, like it literally is something that is a life skill that everybody should. Because you think about, not to get off topic, but you hit a femoral artery 3 to 5 minutes, you're dead. Well, even Lake Geneva is a full. What?
You listen.
Yeah, it was a full-time fire department.
Right.
In the fire department, from the time that you call 911 to the time they dispatch to the time they hear 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, what are you going to do to help yourself between then and that's best case scenario. What here just a couple weeks ago, I had a family member that needed EMS, and City of Lake Geneva Fire Department was at a fire, 2 EMS calls, so the closest ambulance came from Elkhorn. It was 15 minutes.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So
I think another way too that when we talk to our teachers, which I also think is important too, is that when you think about, I didn't sign up to do this, I think you're also missing the point that you are potentially even saving your own life. And what I mean by that is the psychological life that you lead. That you have made a choice to do something, or you don't want to have that, gee, I wish I could have, right? You have the tools to make the decision to do something and to maybe have a better psychological outcome because you chose to be the help, which is really what the training is about, being the help, stepping up and making that decision that I'm going to ensure that I'm safe, and then I'm going to be the help to try to stop that bleeding or to treat that person.
Well, and it's proven that people that when you give them things to do, it causes them to focus and lowers their stress level. But more importantly, in all the teachings that I've done, I always say that you have 2 choices. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. I want to be part of the solution. Because if you don't know how to handle a situation, you're now part of the problem.
You're going to watch the movie, you're going to be in it.
Yep.
Yeah, or you're going to be the one hiding under the desk.
Right? Which, I mean, that obviously we know that occurs as well. And I mean, those are just decisions that people make, But yeah, it's been a good ride. And like you said, what do I want to do? I would really like to continue to do it.
So what's the name of the company?
It's called Medicore Development Group. Okay. Medicore actually means heal. Medicore Development Group. And I've really kind of branched out recently. What I've been doing a little bit more is teaching like outdoor. Like I call it outdoor trauma care or adventure trauma care. I mean, there's a lot of people that are going out and doing all this stuff, high speed stuff. These bleeding is bleeding. And to Dan's point, having these skills and being involved in a mass disaster, right? A hurricane, a tornado, bleeding is bleeding. Yeah. And so the trauma skills, which really does revolve around tourniquets and a few other basic things, is the same. And it's completely exactly what you said. It's not always gun violence. And quite honestly, that might be the least bit that occurs.
That's the exception.
That's the exception. The rule is the motor vehicle crash that you're in, or your child, as you had indicated, that injured themselves, or a spouse, or like I said, that natural disaster. You're hiking, and I mean, there's a myriad of things. So that's kind of been my focus. But I mean, like the class, like I had alluded to out east, that was a business that wanted to like stop the bleed training. So we did, but we talked a little bit about some other things because they did remote work. So what's your plan? Are you your own rescuer? So we talk about things that are revolving not just the injury, but the things that lead up to the injury, and then certainly things after the injury, like how are you going to rescue yourself or to make sure that you get rescued to you. So it's kind of a full spectrum, and it's very, it's the last class I had people that were actually going over to like the Cook Islands. I mean, they were going to be off where there is no medical care, and they were all about wanting to train.
Going up to Canada fishing?
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah, I did a father-son training that had it was 2 younger boys and his dad, and they were going to Canada, and I kept referencing them in the training. I'm saying the boys need to know how to take care of you. I mean, like. Yeah. So it was kind of like it wasn't dad. Dad is the protector. But what happens when the boys need to take care of dad? So to show them that they had the capability to do this, it was very empowering for them. So
it builds your confidence. Yeah. When you can solve a problem, carrying concealed weapon. We all know the guys that take the class and they have the gun and 5 magazines and the giant knives and everything. Chances of being in a gunfight are slim. Yeah. I mean that's. So you literally have one solution to one very small, minute problem. But what about all the other possibilities that could happen?
They probably have minimal capability of verbally articulating themselves out of a circumstance.
Right? So, I mean, the de-escalation and stuff like that is far more important than actually trying to shoot someone. Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to jail for the rest of your life.
Well,
you don't do the other stuff.
When you take de-escalation or conflict resolution, it's not, people think of conflict resolution as a physical act. Conflict resolution could be avoidance. Conflict resolution could be a tourniquet. Conflict resolution could be any number of things. It doesn't matter what it is. You got to be able to at least least have some understanding of what it is you're dealing with and come up with a solution to the problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you got to be able to take the situation to finality,
Yep.
not just prepare for one aspect of a situation.
absolutely.
Because I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, there's like tons of fight videos and stuff out there. People knocking other people out and them tipping over and smacking their head on the concrete and then not moving, and then that person just walks away.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you need to make sure that guy's okay. Like, you might have gotten into a big altercation or whatever, and you're the tough guy, you're the winner. Well, save that guy's life because he could be dead.
Yeah.
So, but they don't. No, people don't think of that.
No.
So, but so how long have you had your company then?
Well, I've actually had two forms of it.
Mhm.
Boy, God, I was doing that, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
I kind of rebranded it a little bit to kind of get into the outdoor environment.
Okay.
It's the same concept.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been, now it's, the current one's been there, I think 3 or 4 years. This is my 4th year.
Okay. Then how do people get a hold of you? or
I
find you?
I have a Metacore, it's actually Metacore Dev Group. It's on, I'm on Instagram primarily.
Okay.
And then I have a website, metacoredevelopmentgroup.com.
Okay. Yeah, you have to give me all that
Yeah,
information, and
sure.
then I can put attach to the video
Yeah.
and everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love to hear from people. Like I said, there's a lot of smart people out there that are doing this. There's a lot of passionate people that are out there doing this. So, I mean, I like the collaboration is great too. I have a lot of ownership. That's sometimes the hardest part about, teaching classes with other people is that, like, I have a lot of ownership. But I also have an open mind to understand that, as I said earlier, if I'm a student of the game, I'm going to listen to what they have to say. And, everybody's got a tip or a trick that I didn't think of. And I'm like, no, that's really going to work. So, I appreciate it. If you want to throw that out there, I appreciate it. I have a class coming up next Saturday up in Stevens Point.
Oh, there you go.
So, at 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. Stevens Point.
Stevens Point. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Ball line outfitters.
All right. Well, would you come on again?
100%. Yeah, I'd love. Yeah. I don't know what else I'm going to talk to you about, but
Well, I'd like to dive in a little bit more into your actual company and
Sure.
some experiences. with
Chris
that
has no
stuff,
shortage
but-
of conversational skills.
Yeah, I can tell.
I appreciate that.
But I think this is a good spot for us to wrap up this time, and I definitely appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much for sharing. It was great.
Thank you.
And then thanks for Dan coming on too. So,
Always his wingman.
yeah, I think you're technically second chair today. So
Second chair. Nice.
So,
He's got his back again.
Yeah.
He's in the corner.
all right. Well,
Thank you.
thanks guys.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
So, yeah,
Appreciate it, Nick.
thank you.
Sir.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Every night coming through televisions. It's a revolution. I would rather die by electrocution than let them silence us or let them lie to us for one more day. This is retribution. Let them hate if they want to hate. Trust them, I say what I want to say. I ain't gonna fake it or run away. Face it, I'm unafraid. Take it on the chin like a man with his judgment day. We're the underdogs, we're the challengers on our worst behavior. We're the renegades, we're the vagabonds, we're our generation. We're the counterculture, we're the underground, don't know what to tell you. Label us as your enemy, but we're the rebellion.